called Campfire Shadows. A great show. I've listened to a lot of the archives, and I've really enjoyed the show. Vic actually sent me 2 different audio files. He sent me one of an encounter he had on his show. I hadn't actually heard the encounter before. And the second piece of audio he sent me was with his co-host Shane. And Shane has unfortunately since passed, but the audio that Vic had sent me was pretty fascinating. It's with Shane during an expedition, and he comes within 10 feet of a Sasquatch staring him down. So I wanted to go ahead and play that tonight for the audience. Before we actually get to that, let me play this encounter because I really found the encounter fascinating, and it's one I hadn't heard before. So we'll go ahead and play the encounter, and then we will bring Vic on.
I used to love the outdoors as a kid, and we moved from the Miami area, northwest Dade County, up to Broward County in 1977. And when we went up to Davie, at the time, there really wasn't very much developed. It was still very wild. And this area, which is called Pine Island Ridge, it's not too far from a little southeast of where Markham Park is now. Markham Park wasn't even there then. And there had been a history of a lot of sightings in the area. I didn't know that. And the Everglades comes over right up to State Road 84, which is now 595, just a little northwest. And I had begun horseback riding and hiking and sometimes even camping out with friends out in this area. It was just really enchanting. A lot of orange groves with ranches and farms and crisscrossed with canals, and there was a series of ridges unique to the area. And of course the 84 Canal, which is the North New River, and it goes right out into the Everglades. And I had just been going out in this area for so long, and I had one incident that I really didn't think much of. I attributed it to a wildcat or possibly a panther, and then some lady had warned me at the ranch that night when I got back and told about it. She said, "You better quit going out there. You're going to get ate up by a skunk ape," And she was proceeding to tell me about all these cattle that had been killed and different things like that were attributed to this and sightings and whatnot. But I just could not bring myself to believe it because I had been going out there in this area for maybe 2.5 years without any real incidents. Never saw a track or anything, so I just didn't believe it. So anyway, this one particular night in 1981, I had decided to. I had started dating a girl, incidentally, up here in Brevard County at the time. I was down south and couldn't see her, and I wanted to get out, see some of my buddies up there that I always saw, and we used to go for walks out there and catch up on each other's past. And when I started to go out this night, I just had a very, very strange feeling just not to go. And I didn't understand why it was, and I just ignored it, basically. And I got up to my buddy's house, and all the boys were out, which had never happened, and their hounds were out running around. That had never happened. And I didn't really want to go out there alone. Mainly I wanted to talk to the guys, but I was also just getting very, very unnerved by this feeling I was getting. But I decided to go anyway. So I crossed the road, and I was out in the orange groves, and the tree line was about 3/4 of a mile away down this tractor road. It's all gone now. And there was orange groves to the left and wooded hammocks that went into the farms beyond, and to the right was an abandoned golf course and a marshy area. And there was a little lake out that way. And I remember I got out there, and there was a little bit of a moon. The wind was out of the east. It was a mild night, typical beautiful night down there. And I was looking up at the stars, as I often did, thanking God for how nice it was out there. But as I looked off in the distance of the tree line, I just felt uncomfortable. And I thought, I haven't been out here in a while. Well, I got up to this tree line in short order, and as I was coming around the edge of it, you just come around the edge of the hammock, and then all of a sudden you're engulfed in these oak trees and brush, and it's very dark in there. You can't really see. And I got in there, and I crossed a short gully, and I got on the wooded trail, and I noticed how thick it had gotten. It just looked like nobody had been out there in a year or so. In fact, the ridge that I was coming up on was very brushy and had really grown up. It used to be very clear for the most part with scattered oaks and pines, but now there was all this brush and hammocks, very thick in there. And as I was walking along, I just heard this very strange call. I can't describe what it was. It was nothing like I ever heard. It was off to my left. It was very shrill. I only heard it one time, and I just it didn't really frighten me, but it startled me. And I was thinking to myself, what on earth is that? It's 10:30 at night, you know, birds don't normally make any noise. And I noticed it was a little quiet in there. That wasn't totally unusual, but it was fairly unusual, just very still. And I just tried to forget it. I said, well, I guess it's just, you know, something I never heard, but I wonder what it is. You know, it was bothering me a little bit, trying to figure out what it was. So I continued walking down the trail, and I don't know, 5-10 seconds later, all of a sudden, I just got this horrible, horrible feeling. All my hair stood up on end at once, and I looked out, it was over in the direction of where that call came from. I just knew something over there was very bad, and something very bad was about to happen. And, boy, I'm getting chills talking about this. And I had about 80 yards to go to get out of this forested trail up on the ridge where it started to get a little open. So I made I wasted no time moving along. I kept looking over my left shoulder in that direction, but I couldn't see very far. But I just had a very bad feeling. I was unarmed and I felt very vulnerable. And mind you, I was in my prime. I was 21 at the time. I exercised, lifted weights. I was a surveyor by trade at the time. Felt very confident in myself. And I just, at this moment, I felt very vulnerable and very in trouble. So I got out of this wooded trail, thank God, and I got into this little opening, and I didn't see anything following me. I couldn't smell anything, but the wind was coming from the east. This thing was downwind of me, whatever it was. So I started to get up on the ridge, and when I got up on the ridge, I stopped for a moment. I actually turned my back to the wooded tree line, and I was looking off to the east, way off at the road about almost a mile away, seeing the cars going up and down. It was kind of an overlook for me. But I started noticing how everything had just grown up very brushy, and it irritated me a little bit because the place had been kept so nice. And then I started to walk, and I had turned my back, I guess, on this tree line maybe close to a minute. Well, I was on a wooded, a sandy horse trail. This ridge line is very hard packed. Down in South Florida, the ground's very hard. There's a lot of rock in it, but even the dirt and sand areas are very hard. And I started walking along, and I noticed, as soon as I started walking, I heard these very, very distinct footsteps in the tree line off to my left, running about parallel to me. And I stopped for a second, and the footsteps stopped immediately. And I turned and looked, and I started to get that very, very bad feeling that I just had moments before. And I was thinking to myself, what is that? I thought it might be hogs, but I started to walk again, and I was looking over, and they resumed walking along parallel, just about 20 to 30 yards away, just in the tree line. And I stopped, and then I heard another step after I stopped, and then it stopped. And I started to get very, very uncomfortable. And I realized right about then, it started dawning on me that this feeling that I had, this premonition, that this was what it was about, and that something, I felt at the time, something very bad was going to happen. And there was the lake at that point was behind me, and I started backing down the slope, and I was looking around, and I picked up a boulder and a stick. That was all that was available. The moon was out, and I was trying to draw it out of the trees. I had this feeling it was going to just come barging out of there. And I began praying an awful lot. I remember that. And I was looking around, and I was thinking, my God, I'm trapped. I looked over at this new condominium development to the north they were building, and it was a good 300 yards away or so. And I would have to go back up toward this thing and get back on the trail to run to it. So I turned around, and I thought about swimming across this lake, but I just had this feeling if I did that, whatever it was going to come get me and catch me in the water, and I didn't want that to happen. And it was just terrifying at that moment. I began to get very panicky, but I remember my dad had told me when I was young in the outdoors, don't ever panic, son, because the animal will know, and that will just make things worse. So I got looking up, and I said, well, I guess I'm going to have to get back up on this trail and just get ahead of it and then take off running. But I waited and waited, and nothing happened. So I slowly angled back up on the trail, and it was dawning on me about the time, my God, this is one of those things, because the footprints were distinctly bipedal. And if any of you have ever been around horses, we had horses there. There's a great big difference when a dog or a person's walking along, and then when a horse is walking along, or is trotting along, especially when they're trotting. It's kind of thunderous in comparison to a person. The ground almost, you could feel the ground moving. And that's what this reminded me of. It was like a two-legged horse, and the only thing I knew exactly what it had to be, because there just wasn't anything else like that. Well, I started walking again, and here come the footsteps again. Right along there with me. They were a little farther up on my left now, almost directly to my left, where before they were angled back a little bit. And I started walking very quickly toward this area. I'm thinking if I can just get up about 100 yards in front of this thing, I could take off running and maybe make it down to this closest condominium, which was about 200 yards ahead by then. There was a swimming pool right next to it with a very lighted area, and I wanted to get into the lights and get over there by people. And as I was walking along, I saw that the tree line kind of merged very close to the trail up ahead, which meant if this thing followed the tree line, it was going to be right up on me. So at some point, I just decided I got to run now. And as soon as I took off running, what horrified me was it started running right with me. And I thought at that point, I couldn't believe how fast I was running. I thought, oh, there's nothing that can catch me. But this thing was bearing down on me. I could hear it getting closer, and the heaviness of the footsteps just horrified me. I didn't dare look over my shoulder because I didn't want to see it. And I got up to this lighted area, and the trees, like I said, got very close there, and they curled around and to this group of oaks that got right up to the trail. It was pitch black in there. And when I got halfway down the slope, I just turned around. I had to just see what was coming on me. And it stopped right in this group of oaks right next to the trail, pitch black in there. Just stopped right in there. You could hear it. And I got so mad, I tried to walk up on it. Actually, I tried to walk up on it once back on by that lake. I just got very angry because I was so terrified. It just made me angry. And for a moment, I tried to walk up on it. But after about 4 steps, something was screaming inside me, "Don't go," you know. And the same thing at that area that was lit up. I tried walking up on it. I got so mad. I just couldn't do it. And it just stayed there. So I saw some people coming out from the condominium, a young couple down by the pool, and I just ran down half hysterical, started blurting out this crazy stuff. Hey, has anybody been scared off from these trails around here or had any bad experiences at night? And they just looked at me and smiled, you know, and walked off. And as they were walking away, I said, how come the maintenance crew hasn't been keeping this place up? You know, thinking maybe something happened with them. And they just kept walking. So I got a drink of water from this water fountain, and I was trying to get my head together, and I just said, you know, this just can't be. This is just there's no way this can be. And I know it sounds crazy, but at that time in my life, I had this, I guess this belief system that, you know, this was my realm. You know, nothing was going to deter me from the plans I set out on. There was no way I was going to go through this condominium development up to State Road 84 and have to take this long detour 3 miles out of the way to get back to where my car was at my buddy's. And I said, you know, this is crazy. This can't be. I've been out here, you know, this just can't be. There's got to be an explanation. Maybe I'm imagining this, you know, all kind of things were going through my head. And I noticed that the condominium that was by me jutted south quite a ways, and I said, well, geez, if I go around the back of this thing, you know, maybe I can sneak through and duck low and come out by that lake, and I'll be 200 yards ahead of this thing, and I can just jog right through the woods and get back in the orange groves before it knows what's happening, because I had no knowledge of these things at the time. And interestingly enough, I think it was already back there in the area that it followed me from. So here I go, sneaking around this condominium, ducking low, looking over my shoulder to the right, back where I thought it was. And the whole time I must have been running right toward it. And as I got by the lake, I was sneaking up on a trail, looking over my right to hear if I could hear footsteps or anything coming. I didn't hear anything, and I thought, I got it. I pulled it over on this thing, you know. And I start walking really quick down the trail back from the way I came to the south, looking over my shoulder to the right. Well, here comes this crashing running right out of the brush, farther down from where it started chasing me before, but it was already running toward me. And I just bolted for my life, you know. That's what I just thought I was going to get ate up. That's the feeling I had, that I was just literally going to be ate up alive. And I ran, and I didn't stop running, I don't think, until halfway to State Road 84. And when I finally got back to my buddy's house and saw my car, I'll just tell you guys right now, I think I almost cried. I was looking across the street just knowing I was going to hear these footsteps running toward me again. And I pulled myself together, and I got into my buddy's house. I had been jogging off and on for a couple of miles by then, and I thought I'd just tell him I'm tired, get some iced tea, and go home. Well, my buddy's fiance, she knew right away something happened. She says, "My God, Darren, what happened?" And I says, "Oh, nothing." She goes, "Don't lie to me, boy. Something happened to you. I can tell." And I just didn't really know what to say. I said, "Oh, I had a little scare out there on the ridge." Well, my buddy's dad sat up in his chair because he was one of those tough cowboy types, and he didn't believe in men being scared. And he started asking me questions. And what do you mean something scared you? What are you talking about? You know, what was out there? You know? And I says, and then he says, "No, you know, what would scare you? You've been out there, you know." I just said, "I think I just got chased by a skunk ape." And then, you know, the disbelief, and he took me to task over it right in front of these ladies. And that's basically why I just never said anything for almost 20-some years.
Everyone here at Bigfoot Hotspot Radio would like to thank Audible.com. Audible.com is the internet leading provider of audiobooks with over 150,000 different titles to choose from. To download a free audiobook of your choice, go to audibletrial.com/Bigfoot Hotspot. Hey, Vic, how are you?
I'm doing good, and you?
Doing pretty good. I got Will on the line with us.
Oh, hey, Will.
Hi, Vic. How you doing?
I'm doing really good, and you?
Not bad.
Good. Hey, just so you know, it's kind of ironic. I'm working my way through one of your books right now as we speak.
Oh. Which one are you reading?
I'm a big fan. Notes from the Field.
Oh, that was my first one. That's actually the best of the three that are currently out, I think.
Oh, really?
That was my first one. That was my first attempt at writing, so.
I like it. It's a good book. I bought all three books. It's the first one I started on. I saw that it was number one, so I thought I'd work my way through them.
Oh, very nice. Well, thanks for buying it.
Oh, anytime. It's a good read.
Vic, before I play this audio of Shane encountering the Sasquatch, will you walk us back through this encounter and kind of describe to us what's going on?
Sure. Well, to start at the beginning, Shane McMahon and I hosted a Squatch-based blog talk radio show called Campfire Shadows a few years ago. A few years before that, he encountered what he described to me as being an 8-foot-plus tall Sasquatch at very close quarters. I wasn't there to personally witness these events unfold. All I can do is relay to you some of the particulars Shane shared with me before he passed away about a year ago. On October 22nd, 2008, Shane, a man named Jim, and a lady named Vicky were way out in the sticks of Alabama doing a live broadcast from the field for the show. When the recording you're about to hear starts playing, the three of them have just moved a short distance from the campfire. They're standing about 15 yards from each other and are watching tall, dark shapes moving around over by the campfire and where their vehicles are parked. Because of all the activity that was going on over there, they failed to notice what was going on much closer to them. Now, before you roll the tape, Wes, I want to explain one last thing. Jim, whose nickname is Bear, was Shane's safety blanket. That's why you're going to hear Shane call out for him time after time when Shane finally realizes that an 8-foot-plus tall Squatch is standing just 10 feet from him. It wasn't until Bear and Vicky had slowly come up behind Shane that he finally started to calm down a little bit because he didn't feel quite so alone.
Yeah, no, that's what I was thinking too. There's more than one up there.
Do you guys have flashlights out there?
We don't use flashlights because we're not trying to, kind of piss them off.
Right.
Because I think at this point, it's safe to say we're probably outnumbered. It's right there, right in front of me, 10 feet. It's looking right at me.
Are you okay?
It's like 10 feet in front of me. It's looking right. I think I'm about to have a heart attack.
Are you okay?
Bear?
What's going on?
This thing is the biggest goddamn thing I've ever seen in my life.
Deep breath again.
Bear, this thing's 10 feet in front of me. These things are the boldest sons of bitches I've ever seen. This thing's not even, it's just looking right at me, staring at me. I mean, just mind-boggling.
You all right?
I just can't believe the thing's just sitting there looking. I mean, Vicky's standing right here by me. And
I got the video cam going.
No, please, don't, please. I don't want to, please.
If you go back and you listen to the Campfire Shadows, the show that Vic and Shane had, I've never heard Shane that shook up. I mean, he's really shook up in that audio.
Yeah, he was definitely a cool, calm customer normally.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to, to fake that kind of emotion. That's pretty strong.
No doubt. It was really neat to find out when I came into the picture with hosting Campfire Shadows with Shane. It was after I found out about that, what happened there. It was neat to be able to talk to Shane and really find out some of the particulars about what was going on. When you hear him start to say, don't, from what I understand, Vicky was about to turn on a flashlight. She thought that would calm him down a little more, and he was terrified that if she did flip that beam on, that Squatch would maybe rip their heads off or something.
Did he ever say why he thought that or felt that way?
Well, that Squatch, he kind of alludes to it when he talks about it being bold. What was going on was the other two were 15 yards away from him, as it was explained to me. And since he was the closest by far to that Squatch, it was just glaring at him, staring laser beams through his soul, he said. That's how he described it to me. Like I said earlier, once Bear and Vicky edged their way up behind him, it took a lot longer for them to edge up to him than what that recording made it seem like. But once they got closer to him, he didn't quite feel like he was out on an island so much, so that calmed him down a little bit at least.
Yeah, I can certainly understand that feeling of that penetrating stare. I had the same thing happen to me the first time I stood in front of two of these things.
Did he say how big the Sasquatch was? Did he say the size of it?
Yeah, he did describe it to me. That was one of the first questions I asked him. Where he was standing was on the dirt road, from what I understand, that led into where they had camped. And he was standing right on the edge of the road, and when he realized the Squatch was there, it was standing next to a tree the Squatch was standing in a little depression-like ditch or something like that. The Squatch's feet, he told me, were about a foot or more below where Shane's feet were. When he looked up at the Squatch's eyes, he said the Squatch was a little over a foot taller still than what he was. That's where the whole 8+ foot Squatch description came to be from.
Did Shane tell you that? Did the Sasquatches just eventually go away? Or what kind of happened after that?
If I remember right, I think he looked away for just a second, and then when he turned his attention back, it was gone.
Jesus. And he told you that he thought there was like 10 of them around him that night, or around that whole camp that night?
That's what he thought, but he told me he wasn't really sure how many there were. They were moving around so much, and where they were, it was so dark where they were that it was really hard to know exactly how many there were. But that was his best guess, was that there were maybe 10.
And were they doing anything to draw them in? Or did they just come in on top of them? Like Will's had a lot of stories where they just kind of came out on them. But were they doing anything to kind of draw them in?
Well, Shane told me that Bear had done a call. He was well known for having a call or two that was supposed to be very effective at bringing them in. I've talked to several people that have been out with Bear and also with Coonbo, a gentleman, Tim Coonbo Baker. Those two were and are really good friends. I've talked to a lot of people who have been out with those two, and they vehemently vouch for their ability to be able to call them in. That's what I was told had happened.
It's not using whoop whoop, is it? I'm just joking.
No, it's not. The call, just so you know, to kind of answer your question a little better, Bear, where he grew up, he says that there was a lot of activity, loads of Squatch activity, and over the years, as he grew up and heard the various calls so often, he said he just basically learned to mimic those calls. He would experiment with different calls. Some calls didn't get a reaction at all when he would go out squatching. Other calls proved to be pretty reliable. That's what he had done. He claims that he had done, Shane said that Bear had done one of those almost foolproof calls.
Interesting. Well, we appreciate sharing it with us, Vic. Appreciate you listening, too. I mean, that was really cool audio.
Yeah, it's a pretty good one. Thanks for having me. I thought that a lot of people would be interested in hearing that.
Oh, yeah, no, we sure appreciate it. That's, that incident reminded me so much of the one we had back in 1976 out near Fort Lewis, where 4 of us were out and surrounded by a group of them most of the night. A very, very similar kind of a situation.
I can put myself in his position, and, you look up. That's why I kind of cut out some of the audio from the two female hosts, because, they were telling them to experience the moment and blah, blah, blah. But when you're standing 10 feet from one of these things, you're looking at them. Experience the moment really isn't the first thing on your mind.
That.
Yeah, exactly.
I experienced the moment, and I think my underwear did too.
You know what, Will? Hearing that unfold, I've been thinking about that over the past couple of days, and I heard your comments on one of the episodes where a caller asked you if you thought that Squatches were dangerous and should be treated that way. Well, on that note, on that topic, I've talked to a lot of Squatchers, having hosted Campfire Shadows like I used to do. I can't tell you how many of them I actually heard say, well, I'd do anything. I'd cut off a toe if I could encounter a Squatch. Well, if they could have traded places with Shane that night when he had an 8-footer 10 feet away from him, I wonder if their opinion would have changed at that moment,
There's two types of people out there, the ones that have experienced seeing one of these things and those that haven't. When you talk to people, I can't think of anybody that I've ever spoken with, myself included, that have seen one of these things up close that would really want to go out and look for one. So people that haven't seen them that want to experience that, but once you have experienced it, it's not something, if I had my choice to go back and do, that I would repeat.
I definitely agree with that.
I mean, you don't know, it's like Wes said, be careful what you wish for.
I'd say, well, keep in mind, Shane claims he had seen a Squatch before, nothing ever that close. But he said one time he did dress up in a ghillie suit where he lived in Wisconsin and went way out into the sticks, into this area that he had put a lot of time into looking for these things, and he basically hid out in some bushes along this game trail. He says that he laid out there all day, and then when the sun started to fall, it was pretty much dusk. He claims that a Squatch came walking up that trail, and once it got pretty close, I don't know the distance, but he told me that once it got within a certain range, it just stopped, like something was wrong, and it started sniffing the air like it could smell him somehow. He didn't have cologne on or anything like that, but he said that it acted like it could smell that something was wrong. And the next thing you know, it turned around and beat feet back the direction it had come.
Are you familiar with the old Bob Titmus story, where he was in the Bluff Creek area not far from where the Patterson film site was a few years before that happened? He was camped up there, and he was out, off in cross country and lost track of time, so he figured it was more dangerous to go back to his camp through the timber in the dark than it would be just to hunker down, so he dug a shallow hole, got in it, and covered himself with leaves all but his face, and he dozed kind of on and off, and around what he figured was about 1 o'clock in the morning, he heard something heavy coming through the timber, and that's exactly what this creature started doing, started sniffing as if it knew he was there someplace but couldn't find him. And it started tearing timber up and screaming and raising holy hell. And then he said that shortly before daylight it left the area. So after a while he got brave enough and got out of the hole, and he went and looked, and he said it looked like a bulldozer had gone through there. Very, very similar kind of incident. So I think occasionally that is what happens. Maybe there's something about people. I know from my time in the military, you're out in field conditions after a while, and you can smell things that you normally wouldn't smell.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, you kind of become more attuned. We, as human beings, we're noisy, we're smelly. We do a lot of things that we think are maybe quiet or low key, but really, to wild creatures or not, we come out, like bulldozers into the forest, and everything knows we're dangerous, so they run. That's why we don't see a lot of wild animals. And when it comes to hunting, it's a real practiced art to be able to get close to wildlife.
I don't know how accurate it is, but I can't remember where I recently discovered this, but some anthropologist made a comment about one of the primitive hominids, how this particular hominid had a sense of smell that was almost as acute as a bloodhound's. I don't know how that could be, considering the shape of a hominid's face and its small nose, but that's what they claimed. I just wonder if maybe Squatches have a sense of smell that's almost as acute. I don't know. I don't think so, because, and it could be a type of primate that had a longer snout, because just like a dog, the reason a dog can smell so well is because they have that long snout. The more snout, the better, because all those nerve receptors are there. They have lots of them that line that area, and as scent particles come in, they get drug over all those, so the brain has more time to process that and pick up, very minute particles.
Where a primate, they look what gorillas do. When they want to smell something, they put it right up in their face. And I know a number of instances where Sasquatches were seen smelling things, and they put it right up in their face because they have that flat nose. I think it's more of a case if a person's in the area, either, like you said, either cologne, deodorant, soap that clothes are washed in, it could be anything. They might pick up that minute particle or noise or something that maybe we think we're being quiet or low-key, and it's something they could pick up.
That makes sense.
The behavior of a Sasquatch reminds me of a kind of a chimpanzee's behavior. I would say more than a gorilla's behavior. All the behaviors you hear are more chimp-like. The throwing rocks, the throwing tantrums. Reminds
I have
me
an
more.
anthropologist friend who was actually commenting on that with me recently, that the behaviors are very much more like chimps.
Yeah, and that's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. Is you hear about these different behaviors. Throwing rocks. It just the whole tantrums they seem to throw when they're pissed. Just reminds me of like a chimp out there.
And they have very short tempers, which is a primate feature. Gorillas, they talk, you see these people or hear about them wanting to go up and do the Dian Fossey thing with Sasquatch as well. Unless you're an expert at it, you can't get to gorillas that way either. You could be torn up by the dominant male of a particular group. You just don't go do that. These things have short tempers. Many other primate species have very short tempers too.
If they do have tempers short, if their fuse is as short as a chimp, that's really scary considering how big and strong they seem to be.
Absolutely.
Not good.
Absolutely. And you see case after case after case where that's demonstrated. I mean, oftentimes, it cuts off just short of violence, but, they do mock charges like gorillas do. One of what I call a classic, in my work anyway, a guy I interviewed back in 1988 in the Columbia River Gorge who encountered a Sasquatch. It charged him. He was scared to death, so he just stood his ground. And it was probably lucky for him because the Sasquatch broke off the charge when it got to about 10 feet in front of him. Stood there. They looked at each other for a few moments. He said then it kind of looked bored and turned and walked off into the forest. Then he went and changed his underwear and all that. But, those things happen. I mean, it's like the two that I encountered now. They were just there. I'm sure they heard me coming, through the tree limbs and things. That was not a happy experience, certainly for me, and they didn't look happy, just like, Shane, the stare that both of them gave me was very penetrating, and it was not a happy encounter. I think had I not had a rifle in my hands and shot in the air, they may have done more than they did. Fortunately, I was able to take off running.
Yeah, it's funny, like on our encounter, the one that was in the tree, the more I look back on it, the more I think of like chimp-type behavior, the way it was kind of shifting, and what you can hear it in Shane's voice too. I mean, it sounds like he's going to break down in tears. Either break down in tears or get down in the fetal position and start sucking his thumb.
And some people go into that state of fear with these things.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. How could you not?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, unless you're Rick Dyer.
That's another show, isn't it?
Yeah,
oh, Lord. I don't know if we want to go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, that rabbit hole's been gone down too many times. But, Dick, what got you interested in doing a Bigfoot show and getting into Sasquatch? I mean, what kind of got you interested in the whole thing?
Well, I've always been interested in talking Squatch, everything to do with Squatches. When I was really young, even, I was reading, had my nose in, I can't tell you how many books to do with the topic. I had been listening to Campfire Shadows. I listened to it for about a year or two when the people that you heard, Wes, that were hosting the show had been hosting it. Well, something happened where they weren't going to be able to host the show anymore, and the topic came up. Well, who out there would want to host the show with Shane, or would be a good replacement for the people that had left? Some of the people that knew me that were also listeners like I was, they posed the idea, well, what about Vic? I think he might do a pretty good job. So they asked me about it, and I said, well, sure. I jumped at the chance, and the rest was history. On my personal end, I might have had a couple of Class B encounters. I never have seen a Squatch. There might have been a couple of times where I was a lot closer to one than I would have hoped. I'm not one of these people that encountered a Squatch that didn't have any interest in the topic until that fateful day, and then next thing you know, they're just head over heels about the topic.
Appreciate you being on the show, coming on the show, sharing your audio with us, and talking with us. We really do appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Interesting stuff. I mean, good guy.
Yeah, not really nice guy. Let me see where this was at. I got something funny for it to play for you.
You know, one thing about, Shane's encounter where Vic was talking about how long he saw the creature, he turned his head for a moment and then looked back and it was gone. When we had our encounter back in 1976, almost the exact same thing happened. We had the creatures. There were 4 of them there. We knew there were 4 because we could hear them screaming, and we could hear that were a little farther away from the camp, and 2 that were just kind of circling the camp. At one point, we, of course, to protect ourselves, we had kind of one crappy flashlight with 4 batteries, and so we built the fire up really big, and that seemed to keep them at bay. At one point, I said, well, let's all face out, with our backs against the fire, all 4 directions, so we can keep an eye on what's going on. If anything comes in, we'll see it. One of my friends, who was the opposite side behind me, wanted to tell me something, so I turned around, kind of turned my head so I could hear him, and he told me whatever he was going to tell me, and he looked back, and he just wigged the rest of it out. He yelled out at the top of his lungs, "Holy!" By the time we turned around, we didn't see anything. And I said, "What happened?" He says, "Well, I turned back after I told you whatever. This thing was standing right behind the tent. The tent was 6 feet tall. This thing was another 2 feet above that, just glaring right at him. And it was maybe, 8, 9 feet away. By the time when he yelled, he said it just stepped back into the darkness. So it was just like that incident where, you look at it one moment, you turn away or do whatever, and they step back into the darkness and they're gone."
Yeah, I've heard that time and time again from people, where they say, hey, I just turned away for a second, and when I looked back, it was gone.
Right.
And I wonder if it'd be kind of interesting to see if other primates do that same type of behavior. When you make eye contact with them, with people's encounters, they seem to just stay there. And the minute that people turn away, they take off.
It's interesting about eye contact. Something a lot of my Indian friends have said is they always say, don't make eye contact with one if you see one out in the wild somewhere. It's supposed to be bad luck or even, fatal if you were to stare at one or make eye contact with one. There is something with other primates where they can be aggressive if you make eye contact with them. So there must be something to that.
Yeah, I've heard gorillas do that. When you make eye contact with gorillas, they take it as a challenge.
They can attack, right. See, that's the thing with primates. Everybody talks about all these different things. With primates, all primates, eyesight and hearing are the 2 top senses of all the things that primates use, and eyesight's the big one. So, we look at, and even humans do it with each other, we look at all these minute body language and visual cues, and it tells us things. And other primates are the same way. They look at all those different postures and for whatever cues, and I'm assuming, to see whether something's a threat or friend or whatever.
Yeah, you're right. I think even humans do that. When you walk down the street and you see someone staring at you, you kind of stop and you kind of figure out what's going. Is this going to be a threat or what's this guy's problem?
Exactly. What's going on here?
No, I wanted to play this for you. Did you hear about this other guy that claims to have shot a Sasquatch out in Maryland?
I don't think so.
Yeah, his name's Mark Schell, and he lives in Maryland. This is kind of funny because, so here's what he posted on YouTube, and then I'll play the second part that's even funnier.
For all you non-believers, maybe it's time you start believing. I shot this one out near Gunpowder Falls in Maryland, just south or downstream of the reservoir. There was a couple others a lot bigger than this one here. This one is stopped. I was able to get a nice clean shot with 30-06. Took it right down. Sasquatch.
Oh, man. 30-06. I shot it down. Sasquatch.
Shot it down.
Yeah. What's funny is that was his second take. He accidentally posted the first take. Here's the first take.
Oh, no.
For those of you non-believers, maybe it's time you start believing.
Yeah, he accidentally posted that. I guess it's funnier if you watch the video because he's trying to what he shows. I was going to post on Facebook, but it's not even worth. It's like Rick Dyer Jr. It's not even worth posting on Facebook. But it looks like he shot a rat, and the rat's laying there in the snow. It might even be like his mom's coat. But
and some of these jokers, they put funny things up there. But I'm thinking, okay, what's the point of all that? I mean, that's kind of juvenile.
Yeah, it's retarded. You think if you shot a Sasquatch, your first thing wouldn't be, hey, I'll slam this up on YouTube. But it's funny because
what's the motivation?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we talked about that before about if somebody sees one or would take the next step and actually shoot one. Usually the reaction is you don't want to tell anybody. So when somebody comes out and makes some big claim, and we know a couple like that in the past year or two, you have to ask yourself, what's the motivation for this person coming out making these claims? What do they want from this? Where usually a real witness, you have to practically drag it out of them to get them to talk.
Yeah. Shot one. Sasquatch.
I got him.
Yeah.
I got him. You want him.
And what's funny is if he had actually done his homework, he says, oh, well, there was a bunch of them around there, but I shot this one. It was the smallest. He would know that. He would be walking up on the body.
No, the other ones would have either had him or taken the little one or both.
Everyone here at Bigfoot Hotspot Radio would like to thank Audible.com. Audible.com is the internet leading provider of audiobooks with over 150,000 different titles to choose from. To download a free audiobook of your choice, go to audibletrial.com/Bigfoot Hotspot.
Well, this will kind of appeal to our Southern California fans. And, as happens all too often, I don't have the source of where this information came from. It was a piece written by two individuals, Ken Hulsey, and I hope I pronounced that correctly, and Terry Presley. And they start out by describing Bigfoot creatures in Southern California, and they say, huge, scary, aggressive, fast, and threatening. These terms are used to describe several Bigfoot-like creatures said to inhabit the desert regions of Southern California. The mysterious giant apes go by many different names: the Borrego, Sandman, the Speedway Monster, Zoobies, Devils, and the Yucca Man. And what's interesting about this, I never used to think much of, any claims from Southern California, but last summer I was flown to L.A. to do a piece for the Sci-Fi Channel, and they took me out into the Angeles National Forest, and I'm sure locals in Southern California know this, but many others don't. There's some pretty rugged mountains east of Los Angeles, and not very far east, that are timbered. So I was impressed when I went there. I thought, wow, there really could be one or two wandering around this country. But what is also interesting is, the history of the Sasquatch being talked about to non-Indian peoples go back a good 300 years. The first Spanish missionary was actually, or his first Spanish mission was established in 1769 in the San Diego area. But Spanish missionaries had been in that area many, many years before that time. And the local Indians often told them stories about these wild men. So I'll just, if you can bear with me, I'll read through some of this. It's pretty interesting, where they talk about the local Gabrielino Indians, and I'm sure I butchered that, told the Padres about hairy devils that lived nearby. In fact, according to written accounts, the Indians lived in fear of these large, foul-smelling wild men and refused to go anywhere near the reported home called Towas Puki, which means Camp of the Devil, on the southern bank of the Santa Ana River, which is very, very similar to the stories from the 1840s that come out of the Mount St. Helens area. Same thing, local Indians talked about the hairy giant cannibals that lived in the Mount St. Helens area that would eat Indians, and they couldn't even be bribed to lead anyone to that area. The history goes back quite a ways.
It's interesting that they called them devils, and it makes me, when they call them devils, I almost wonder if, how they name different parts of the country, like
right.
Devil's Canyon or Devil's Peak.
It makes you wonder about the origins of those names.
Yeah, exactly. But I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead, Will.
Oh, no problem. Well, this first one, like I said, I'm just going to kind of read through some of these. Are very interesting. The first one is concerning an area called Dead Men's Hole near Holcomb Village, just west of the Anza Borrego Desert State Park, was a water stop on the old stagecoach lines during the mid to late 1800s, and is reported site of several alleged murders blamed on Bigfoot. In 1876, one of the passengers who ventured out of the safety of the coach while its horses stopped to take a drink reported seeing a large, naked, hairy thing watching him from behind some scruff. After that, several people met their demise at this same site, either strangled or beaten to death by an unknown person or thing. They blamed the monster, of course, regardless of the fact whether or not it actually killed them. In April 1876, San Diego Union reported an encounter with a missing link near Warner's Ranch, also west of Anza Borrego, by a young man named Turner Helm. So he said, according to Helm, the creature had dark fur like a bear and a face like an American or a Spaniard. And as this goes on, in March 1888, Two local hunters, Charles Cox and Edward Dean, set out to hunt down the monster and finally put an end to the murders. According to the San Diego Daily Transcript, the pair found and killed what they were looking for. The creature described as a gorilla with the face of an Indian and fangs like a bear. The creature's body was to be transported to San Diego, where it was to be put on public display, but mysteriously disappeared before arrival. Reportedly, in 1939, a prospector who was interviewed in the 1970s, wished to remain anonymous, was attacked by a large group of upright walking apes. As he camped near the Borrego Sink, frightened men described the creatures as very large, covered with white fur with glowing red eyes. The only thing he said that saved him was the fact that the monsters were afraid of his campfire. And we moved on. There was actually a large number of sightings beginning in the mid-1960s. Saga magazine had an article titled America's Terrifying Woodland Monster Men, dated 1969. An excerpt from that story says that gold prospectors and treasure hunters frequently seek their lost bonanzas in isolated areas. Since 1964, treasure hunters in the Borrego Valley Desert in California have whispered about the abominable Sandmen of Borrego. The arid area is near the Mexican border. It is virtually uninhabited. There are many fissures, caves, and crevasses in the Superstition Mountain region, and proctors say the Cocopa Indians told of a subterranean labyrinth under the mountain. Major Victor Stoyanov was seeking an access into the Superstition Hills in January 1964 when he noticed large humanoid tracks in the sand dunes. The prints ran in pairs generally parallel and averaged about 14 inches in length and 9 inches wide in the instep. Major Stoyanov declared he returned to the desert on several other occasions, made plaster casts of the prints, and snapped photographs. He was quoted as saying, "Curious as I am, I hope that the person who discovers what kind of beast this is doesn't happen to be me."
Don't you think it's interesting that you don't hear any gifting stories? You don't hear anybody like that one lady.
And that's exactly it. I mean, none of the accounts here are the fuzzy, warm stories that some of these people like to think about the Sasquatch. And you can go through much, and I'm familiar with a lot of the history of the subject, and none of the stories are the warm, fuzzy ones. I don't know where people come up with that stuff. It's nonsense. It is not part of what this subject is.
Yeah, it just amazes me because when you go back through history, you don't, and I've read the article that you actually sent it to me, Will, and I went through it. You don't hear any sharing gifts with Sasquatch. These are friendly forest people. You don't hear any of the happy-go-lucky stories. It's always, they're usually called devils, or they'll usually tear you apart, or
cannibals or something. Yeah, they're always very fear-inspiring, either names or accounts. The behaviors are never friendly. And it's whether the people involved are doing anything to, instigate that kind of behavior or not. It says, Harold Lancaster, treasure hunter, was prospecting in the Borrego Sink east of the settlement of Borrego Springs, California in July 1968 when he saw a sandman. Apparently sandman was one of the common names in that area for these creatures. He said, "I was camped on a mesa one morning when I saw a man walking in the desert." He reported, "The figure came closer and I thought it was another prospector. Then I picked up my binoculars and saw the strangest sight in my life. It was a real giant ape man," Lancaster said. "I had heard about the screaming giant ape men up in Tulum County that frightened people for a couple of years. Another person and I even went up to look for the thing. I decided it was a hoax, never expecting to actually see one. As the Sandman drew closer, Lancaster became worried. That thing was big. I was no match for it," he reported. "I had only a .22 pistol on my hip, and it would have been like shooting at a gorilla with a pea shooter. I was afraid the beast might get too close, so I fired a couple of rounds in the air. The Sandman jumped a good 3 feet off the ground, and when the sounds of the shots reached him, he turned his head toward me and then took off running in the other direction."
The gentleman in that story, he was pretty smart, shooting in the air instead of at the creature.
And I can see that, because in my own first encounter, I had my .22 rifle. I knew that what was standing in front of me was far too large to do anything except piss it off. Being smart, I shot in the air, hoping that maybe it would scare it away instead it brought the other one in. But so what? It wasn't so smart. If the other one was behind me, had I not had a rifle, what would have been the outcome of that situation? I don't like to think about that.
Easy picking.
So in 1964, a father and son found themselves being pelted by rocks by a shaggy creature while hiking near Escondido. Later that same summer, a juvenile Sandman was implicated in the death of 3 cows on the MGM ranch near Jamul, west of Anza Borrego. This time the creature left behind plenty of large human-like tracks in the soft dirt. Okay, then we go into what was called the Dragway Monster. I believe that was, maybe I'm off in the loop, but the city of Fontana has had a long and glorious history associated with auto racing. As most of you probably know, the city is the present home of the Auto Club Speedway, which holds a yearly major NASCAR race along with other racing events of different types. What many of you may not know is back in the 1950s, there was a drag strip in the area that was considered one of the best in the country. The Mickey Thompson's Fontana International Dragway lasted for almost 2 decades before a series of fatal accidents forced it to close in 1972. The area is now a housing tract known as the Village of Heritage and lies about a mile east of Etiwanda Boulevard on the north side of Foothill Boulevard. These race events took place for 2 decades, attracting legions of die-hard race fans. They also attracted a very curious monster. The height of these sightings took place in the early 1960s when race patrons would regularly spot a giant, hairy, Bigfoot-like creature crossing a field adjacent to the track in full view of the grandstands. Bigfoot monster had been so regularly that it earned the name Speedway Monster. Though witnessed by hundreds of people, no one ever worked up the courage to investigate it. It is hard to speculate why a creature known for being reclusive and shy of humans would trek so close to the racetrack, filled with people, and not to mention the loud noise produced by the cars. One can only assume that it was curious about what all the fuss was about, or more likely that the creature was making plans to rummage through the trash cans for leftover burgers and hot dogs after everyone cleared out, which is very, very likely because these guys, in many cases I've known, where they've gone through rummaging through garbage areas.
I think it's funny how we as humans give name to these creatures based on what's nearby, you know, like Grassman, or in this case, it's called the Speedway Monster.
When I was a little boy, out behind the town of Ording, Washington, you know, we had the county rock quarry. My dad worked for the county, and they quarried that granite to line the river so they wouldn't flood. The kid that came to our house that night in 1968 called that one the Rock Quarry Monster. Yeah. And also, you know, when they talk about in this article about, you know, the monster coming near all these people in the grandstands, I've heard other stories around Yakult, and you know the town of Yakult, they have the baseball field in town there. There was an account, at least one that I know of, where there were several hundred people in those stands, kids playing baseball, and one of these things came right up in midday behind this group of people, and they all turned and saw it standing there. And it just kind of, you know, looked at them, and then it turned around and walked away.
Yeah, that doesn't shock me in Yakult. They're pretty ballsy out there.
Yeah, they are. Goes on and says, in July of 1965, the monster attacked a young boy as he walked home. According to the account, the creature surprised the lad by jumping out from behind some bushes. As he tried to escape from the monster, his clothes were torn to shreds. The child managed to get loose and run away. The monster reportedly did not give chase. In August 27th that same year, a woman named Jerry Mendenhall was attacked while in her parked car on a residential street in Fontana by a mud-covered monster that smelled like a dead animal. The creature reportedly grabbed her through the open driver's side window, frightened the young woman, put the car in gear, and stepped on the gas and escaped, leaving the monster in the dust.
There was an encounter in Washington where a little boy was riding down a trail, and a Sasquatch had actually jumped out of the brush at him in front of the kid and had growled at this kid. And he reportedly got back on his bike, hysterically rode off, and the Sasquatch didn't give chase. You know, people say these creatures aren't threatened by women, aren't threatened by children, which may be true some of the time, but not always.
Exactly. And there's you always find pieces in different areas, different regions, different time periods that are similar to others. Like this one, it's just in 1991, a Fontana resident, John Davis, reported that hairy creature on 2 legs raided his chicken pen, and we've heard stories just like that. Then they go back here back in the 1800s, an area between what is now the towns of Luverne and Pomona near Fontana was known to local Indians as Toy Biped. I'm not sure how they pronounce that, but it meant that devil woman who was there reported to be the hunting ground of a local female Bigfoot. This one is kind of interesting. It's like the military story we had on Fort Lewis where the guy was left with the truck. This is on a cold February night, 1971. A wood guard manned a post outside an armory on the outskirts of a Marine base near 29 Palms. Without warning, the otherwise unearthly quiet was suddenly shattered when a large mass appeared out of the dark desert landscape. The guard raised his rifle and commanded the being to halt. Much to the young man's surprise, the large figure did not stop, but instead charged right at him at an inhuman rate. As the figure drew closer, the Marine realized What was approaching rapidly was not a man at all, but a huge, upright, running, hair-covered creature. Paralyzed by shock, the young guard stood his ground, too frightened to move. The mysterious creature threw the young man to the ground, rendering him unconscious. When the guard's relief arrived several hours later, they found him almost incoherent with his rifle nearly bent in two. After the incident, both CIA and the FBI were contacted to conduct an investigation. Much to their surprise, the locals were more than eager to tell their stories about giant man-beasts in the area. In fact, the very same night as the attack on the guard, two creatures had been seen roaming through a neighborhood relatively close to the base. When a local couple looked out of their front window to see what was upsetting their dog, they saw the two yucca men crossing the front lawn. Then sometime later, the same creatures were seen near a horse corral some distance away. The investigation also revealed that several employees at the Joshua Tree National Monument had seen Bigfoot-like creatures on numerous occasions.
A lot of people talk about these creatures being close to, Indian reservations or military bases. And when they talk about Indian reservations, I've heard people say, well, they have a long relationship with these creatures and blah, blah, blah. But when you think about an Indian reservation or even like a military base, they're usually in remote locations. They're not.
Absolutely.
And I think that is why a lot of these creatures around military bases or around Indian reservations, because I know here in Washington and Oregon, they're in remote locations. They're away from everyone else. They're not in town. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and most people don't understand, and Indian reservations are very much like those military reservations in that, the people that inhabit those places kind of stay in core areas. Not many of them really venture out often into, the expanses that those reservations occupy. Fort Lewis is a good example. The main post is kind of a tiny area, and it's surrounded by all these huge tracts of forest. And when people are out there, the troops usually occupy kind of the same areas, which are usually tank trails, or they have certain training areas that they occupy. But people aren't out there every single day. So there's a lot of places for wildlife to come in, and they can move through those places fairly unmolested or even totally unnoticed. And the same is true with a lot of the big Indian reservations.
It's not like you can go out there and pop off a shot without going to jail or going to the Indian jail,
Right. I know when we went back in 2003 to the Klamath Reservation in southern Oregon, that was an eye-opener. That's a pretty large chunk of land. The director of the cultural committee was taking us out he was showing us around, some of the areas where things had been reported seeing, and some of those folks live a long way out there. And, herds of cattle were roaming. We'd had to actually stop at one point. There were hundreds of cattle that were kind of milling slowly across the road. And he says, well, we have to wait until they go by. But there weren't any fences there, and people were spread a long way from one another. And they just had these giant areas where, in fact, speaking of that same area, another friend from the Klamath tribe was telling me he used to bring me salmon every year. He says they got their allotment every year, and they didn't like salmon, so he'd give me his allotment. But he was telling me they went on a hunting party one year, and he said there were probably, somewhere between 10 and 20 of us, and they had to drive a whole day to get to the first camp. And when they left the first camp, they went on foot from there to the second camp, the more remote camp. So this was a long, long way out from any sort of civilization. And he said when they got out to this second camp, and I don't remember exactly what the details were about how this Sasquatch came upon them, but there was at least one, maybe two. One of them was a big gray one, and it actually attacked them. This group of Indians, and he says, some of us had automatic weapons and everything, and everybody was so scared. They were shooting up in the air and making all this noise while this thing was circling and menacing them, and finally they took off running, just, scared to death, for the first camp where they could get to their trucks and get the hell out of there. And he says, we were scared to death the whole time, and not knowing who was not going to make it back.
Wow, so it was an unprovoked attack?
Exactly, absolutely unprovoked.
Wow.
There's more that goes on in Southern California than meets the eye. So, for our folks that live in that area, I hope that was interesting. It's fascinating what I've read through some of these articles.
Yeah, it is pretty fascinating. I didn't realize that they had that much going on down there. What, do they have a lot of pine trees down there?
Mostly pine.
Yeah, mostly pine. That's what I thought. That was definitely interesting. I'm sure a lot of people in the Southern California area will anytime you hear about it, it's always more fascinating to hear encounters by your area. Whenever I look up encounters, I usually first go to Washington because it's the state I'm from. I had no idea they had that much going on down there. I didn't even know there was that much forest in that area.
I didn't either until I went there last summer, as I mentioned, for the Sci-Fi Channel. And they took me out there, and I thought, wow, it was actually, very rugged, very high mountains. I'm not sure what to compare it with, but it's every bit as comparable to, the Cascade Mountains, some of those peaks down there. Maybe not as high as, of course not as high as things like Mount Rainier or Hood or some of those, but, very rugged mountains for sure.
Yeah, that was actually pretty interesting, hearing some of those encounters, especially some of the aggressive ones.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I read through, I thought, man, these guys are going to go crazy hearing some of these stories down there.
It's funny that, like you said, you never hear about the happy ones. It's always the...
It is.
It's hard to find.
The more you dig into it, the more you dig into this, the more you realize, the happy Harry and Henderson's stuff is total crap, because the bulk of this are these kind of stories.
I tell you about, I think I was telling you earlier about all the comments about our last show about the government cover-up. They're saying,
right.
A lot of people are saying they'll protect us from the Men in Black while we're digging with the shovel.
That's cool. I love it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It's nice to know we have that kind of support.
Yeah, a lot of people are saying they'll go with us, so sounds like we'll have a small battalion out there.
Well, now if we can just get the financing to do it, we'll take those folks with us.
Yeah, absolutely. The show is sponsored again by Audible.com. Everyone, if you can, go to audibletrials.com/Bigfoot Hotspot. Yeah, it's funny. The free book I got is read by Gary Sinise. You know who that is, the actor?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. I was like, you're going to read me a book, Gary Sinise, every night.
All right.
It's actually pretty good.
It's a pretty cool sponsor, I think. It's an awesome deal to have an audio book to just listen to instead of, it's like we'd mentioned last time, not having the time or oftentimes the place even to sit down and read a book. If you can just take your phone or whatever other device and listen to a book, it's a pretty awesome way to do it. And this opportunity, for a 30-day free trial helps us immeasurably. So, we definitely appreciate the support by all of our fans. If they want to help us out by signing up for the free trial, and you can cancel at any time. It doesn't cost a cent, but it helps us a whole bunch.
Yeah, it's the Lazy Man's Way /Bigfoot Hotspot for your free 30-day trial and your free first downloadable book. We've been talking with our sponsor about these burial sites and some of these different locations that we have between the Columbia River and Mount St. Helens. And a lot of people I think would enjoy going up to check out some of these burial sites that we have, or potential burial sites. The mounds on them just doesn't look right. It's not man-made. It's not natural, the formation of some of these burial sites. I just have this odd feeling we're going to find something in there. But I was thinking, as I was talking with our sponsor had mentioned that if we can get up to 5,000 people sign up for the trial, whether they continue the trial or not, but at least sign up for the trial, they will sponsor and pay for to have 5 people fly out to Washington, out here in the Pacific Northwest, and go out with us for 1 week to check out some of these burial sites, to check out some of these. I know we have, I think it's 5 locations between the Columbia River and Mount St. Helens that are always hot. I thought that was kind of a cool offer from them. I know 5,000 is kind of a big number, but I thought that was kind of a cool offer for them to offer that to us and to our listeners.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity. It'd be a lot of fun for our listeners, the 5 chosen, and for us to be able to show, what we're doing and the possibility that we could find something under one of these locations. And not just that, but there are other things we could show, the 5 people who would be chosen, some of the different things, possibly tracks, territorial markings, things like that. A lot of different things that we see in the field. So it is a great opportunity, and as you mentioned, or we're going to mention about if they already had an Audible account, another way they could participate.
Yeah, what I was thinking is, again, the site is audibletrial.com /Bigfoot Hotspot. It doesn't cost anything. You're just signing up for a trial. Some people already have an Audible account, and I know a lot of listeners have sent you emails. They sent me emails saying if we already have an Audible account. So I set up a PayPal account, and when you go to PayPal, you need an email address to send money to. The email address to send money to is BigfootHotspotRadio@gmail.com. BigfootHotspotRadio@gmail.com. What I was thinking is maybe we could take an additional 5 with us. You know, if you put in $10, we'll put the way I'm thinking of doing this, unless the listeners have better ideas, doing somewhat of a drawing. So for every Audible account that gets signed up, their name goes in a hat. If they want to donate, say for every $10, their name goes in the hat. If they put in $20, we'll put your name in the hat twice. And then come July, because I think we're thinking about doing this at the end of July, correct, Will?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, to get to some of these locations, it would be better to do it in July. In May, what we'll do is we'll pull names out of the hat, and at the end of July is when we'll actually go out and have this expedition. But when we'll pull 5 out from Audible, and then we'll pull 5 out from the people that donated. It doesn't cost you anything. All this is going to be paid for, so if you're out there in Texas, if you're out there in Connecticut, if you're out there in you don't obviously live down the road, your plane ticket will be paid for, your food will be paid for, everything will be paid for. And we'll go and take several people out to these locations. I almost think I'd rather do something like that than a television show. It'd be kind of cool to take 10 of our listeners out there.
I was thinking, too, that, Rene DeHinden had, let me back up just a little bit, Roger Patterson, when he filmed that Sasquatch in 1967, he made 3 footprint castings that day. One of the casts broke, but he was left with a left and a right foot. And Rene DeHinden had those 2 casts after Patterson died, and he loaned me those casts, and I made molds from those. So for the people who win the drawing, I'm going to give them each a copy of the left and right cast and copies of my books also. Yeah,
we'll make it a good time. I mean, like I said, those burial sites that we've been looking at, I mean, I really feel like there's something there. There's something to them. And I've been on the edge of just going out there right now by myself and digging them up. But I think it'd be kind of cool to get the listeners involved, have them be a part of the experience. And, having 5, 10, 15 people with us isn't too out of the picture. It's not too many to go and take out. A lot of these areas, especially up on Muffet Mountain and some of the areas around Mount St. Helens, I don't think those Sasquatches care how many you bring up. So I think we'll be okay
and with, the 3 of us, we could even break into smaller teams, so we're not making such a big presence when we're going to areas. But it's something we'll have to decide on, once we go into these places. But the listeners, whoever's chosen to go along would have a great time and have a great experience. We never quite know what we're going to experience when we go into one of these places, so be prepared for anything.
Yeah, be prepared for anything. I'd definitely be prepared for anything, I can tell you that much. But yeah, no, if you would like to get your name in the hat, again, if you go to PayPal, it's BigfootHotspotRadio@gmail.com. If you want to send a donation, like I said, $10, get your name in the hat. Every $10 you send, we'll just put your name in the hat again. If you sign up with Audible, we'll be able to pull your information from Audible, your email address, and we'll put your name in the hat that way too as well. I'm looking forward to it. I think it's kind of a cool idea. I'd rather do something like this than say, well, you can come with us, but it's going to cost you $2,000 and blah, blah, blah. I mean, no one has $2,000 to throw around.
No,
but,
of course not. And something listeners might consider too, one of the places we're going to are where you and Woody had your encounter. So for all you folks and we had a huge response and continue to get a big response about the show we did about your encounter, that's one of the places we're going to. And the Sasquatches are still in that area.
Yeah, I don't, I'm telling you, man, that area is creepy.
It always has been. Creepy. It always has been.
I know tonight we have on the show Bobby. So let's bring Bobby on and hear his encounter, and then we will get to Bear.
Well, Bobby, you had a number of experiences from what we were discussing, chatting on email. So I guess the way to start, would be to just go and let you take the ball and go from your first encounter or first experience and sort of what led up to that, maybe what knowledge you had of the subject before this first encounter.
Well, I've always been into it. I mean, ever since I was like 10 years old. I mean,
I remember we went to a library back when I was in school, and they come across a book called Mysteries and Legends or something like that. And it had a picture of Patty from the old Roger Patterson film. As soon as I saw that, I was hooked, because I was thinking, oh, you know, there's a monster in the woods, I'm hooked.
So, when you were a kid and you saw that, from that time on, when was the first time you had an experience, and sort of what, you know, tell us what happened, what led up to that?
Well, actually, the first time that I ever actually had an experience was when me and my son actually started going down into the area that I've been using. I had actually heard about it, but, you know, I had never really, you know, dealt with it, because I always thought that, you know, you had to go out to California or, you know, Sierra or the Mexico or whatever to do this, or up in the mountains. You know, I never knew that, you know, there was an area 30 minutes from my house that had a hot spot. Back around 2008, me and my son were down in one of the areas. We were sitting in the back of my truck, in the pickup truck, and in the bed of it, and we were just sitting there talking. And it was about, I'm going to say, probably 10 o'clock at night. And over on the right-hand side of us, we started hearing what sounded it actually sounded like a little girl. And she was going, whoop, making them whoop sounds. My son turned and looked at me, and he said, "Did you hear that?" And at first, I just kind of played it off, because I thought, well, I'm not going to say anything, because I didn't want him to get scared. And we sat there. About 5 minutes later, he'd done it again. And he looked at me and he said, "Now, you can't tell me you didn't hear that." And I said, "Yeah." I said, "I heard that." And no sooner than we heard that whoop, on the left-hand side of us, we started hearing a knock on a tree. And it sounded just like somebody had a rock and they were tapping on a tree. Well, about 15 minutes went by, and on the right-hand side of us, there was another whoop sound, and it sounded just like a little girl. And there was nobody out there in this area but us. And after that whoop came again, about probably less than 20 seconds later, there started coming the knocks on the trees again. That is the very first experience I ever had in that area. Well, after I left there, I started, you know, digging into it, started getting into it. And I thought, well, I'm going to try to find out what's going on down here. And the more I got into it and the more I delved into it, I started talking to people down in the area. I started looking online, trying to find as much stuff as I could. And that's when I actually found out that that section of North Carolina has had a lot of sightings since like the early 60s and 70s. And I think there's been like maybe between 85 and 90 sightings since the late 60s. And I never knew nothing about it, because it's always it's kind of like the type of town where, you know, it's like a hush-hush deal. They don't want you to think that you're crazy or anything like that.
Right.
Yeah. So after I got actually down in there and I met a few people, they started talking to me. And they started, like, you know, saying, well, you need to be in this area, or you need to be back over here, or you need to be over here. And the areas that they actually pointed me into was 3 of the main areas that's down there that are really active. And that's where I've been doing my research ever since. And that's been since I started middle of 2008, and I really started doing my research about January of 2009.
Yeah, I know what you mean about, you know, not getting information from certain areas. A few months back, I got an email from some folks in North Carolina. They weren't really sure how to approach the subject, and I don't remember how they found out about me, but we got chatting back and forth, and come to find out, both people had some form of experience. One gentleman, he was driving, I want to say it was home from work. Don't quote me on that, but it was either to or from work, and had one cross in front of the highway in front of him. It was right near a game trail. You know, the fence was down along the road, and it had followed this game trail across the road. And
yep.
And the lady actually passed one as it was apparently had killed a deer alongside the road and was actually down. She thought it was a buffalo at first. And then she thought, well, there aren't any buffalo here. So she drove by this thing, you know, down next to on the side of the road on the shoulder, and actually found, you know, portions of a killed deer there the next day. So there are definitely things going on in your part of the country. So, you know, and again, you know, people don't realize that there's stuff going on in a lot of places that nobody ever realized.
Yeah, I know, because I found out just a few weeks ago that actually where I live at, exactly 3.5 miles from where I live, there was a sighting back in 2012 of a 7'5" bipedal creature walking across the road at 2 o'clock in the morning. Mm-hmm. And I was like, really? 3.5 miles from my house? Okay.
It's a little startling, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I went down there to the area, but the area is like, it's not like, it's all private property, but it's not like, you know, like a housing development. It's just a boatload of woods and forest, but it's all like private land. So, I started looking into that, and then I met a guy about 4 weeks ago, and he came up to me, and I've gotten kind of popular in my area with what I do. People know who I am now. And this guy came up to me, and he said, "Can I ask you something?" And I said, "Sure." He said, "People think I'm crazy." He said, "But you're the Bigfoot guy." And I said, "Well, if that's what you want to call it, yeah, that's what I am." And he said, "I'm going to tell you something." He said, "Me and my girlfriend saw something about a month ago." And he said, "I've talked to several people about it." And he said, "People told me who you were and I needed to talk to you." And he said, "I've never really had a chance to talk to you." And he said, "I was actually scared to come up to you." He said, "Because I didn't want you to think I was crazy." And I was like, "Well, you know, you can get on the crazy train right now because I'm on it head first." And he told me that they were coming, and this was coming out of Moore County. They were coming back, and right there as you're leaving the county, there was a huge pottery sign. And I went down there and looked at it. And the sign is probably a good, I'm going to say it's a good 8 foot long, and it's probably a good 5.5 foot wide. And it's, I think it's a good 8 feet in the air. Well, he said that about 12:30 at night that him and his girlfriend were coming back, and he said all of a sudden, he said this thing steps out behind this sign, takes about 2 steps, and it clears the road. He said, well, when he saw it, he said all he could see was about mid-waist. He said it was a pair of long legs. He said it had shaggy-looking hair just like a dog. He said that it was walking upright like a man. Well, he said not only did they see it, there was 3 cars right behind them. So as the thing went across the road, he said they went on by and they spun around. He said because he wanted to come back and see if he could see anything. He said when they came back, that when they got back to that one area, the 3 cars that were behind them were pulled over, and they were all standing out there with flashlights because every one of them saw it. Wow.
And then I started looking up, and in that area of Moore County and Randolph County, there has been sightings since the 40s and 50s, and I never knew that until I actually looked up that area. Had never known that.
A lot of places are like that. They don't, and people don't understand until, it's only been till in recent years, you know, with the media. And I would say, you know, when this whole subject really got national attention back in the late 50s, you know, in Northern California with Jerry Krug, you know, when the dozer operator that found tracks in the Bluff Creek area when they first put roads in that area. Before that, you know, newspapers, there wasn't, you know, the Associated Press or any of these kinds of organizations that disseminated these stories around the country. They were usually localized events, and these kind of stories weren't big news. It was just, you know, it was just a local thing. Somebody saw something, and that's the way it went. And those stories go back 200 years. There are a lot of things, a lot of areas where there are stories that I'm sure a lot of people simply aren't aware of, but the stories do exist all over the place, and they go way, way back.
Well, that's like down in my area. I use 3 different areas, but actually just about everywhere down there's been a sighting. But there's 3 main areas that I use, and the area that I'm in, there's a trail. It's a 54-mile trail that goes from one end to the other. But you've got trails that scatter out everywhere. And if you start at one end, actually basically it's like if you go from north to west, south to east, whatever, it's 200 miles altogether. So there's a lot of walking room right there and a lot of distance. And they say, oh, you know, it's you've got 50 or 60 or close to 70,000 acres down here. That's not enough room for Bigfoot to hide. I got news for you. I can go out there and hide, and you will never find me.
Right, and you know, and if people are saying that, they're not aware that usually a group size for the Sasquatch is usually between 4 and 6 individuals. So if you've got just one group occupying that much space, chances of seeing them are pretty slim.
That's exactly right. What I've heard from people who've actually done stuff, I mean, there's people who've been down there doing areas down here where I'm at probably good close to 30 years, and I've talked to several of them, and they said that they believe that there's there are a family of them, but there's probably no more than 9 or 12 in the entire area, and I'm talking, you know, close to 200 miles.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the groups are never really any bigger than that.
But now the biggest one that's been seen down here, from what I understand, I haven't seen him yet, is 9 foot. That's the biggest one.
And that's about the size of the one Wes and Woody encountered.
No, yeah, the one we saw, actually, it was probably a little bit closer to 10, maybe 11 feet tall. But yeah, within that range.
Now, I've seen 2 down here, and the first one I saw was a female, and that was back on December the 8th of 2012. And she was about, I'm going to say between 6'4" and 6'5", every bit of it. And the second one I saw was last summer, 2013,
and that was a large male, and he was almost 8 foot.
Yeah, that's pretty typical. Occasionally, though, you'll get a really big one. I sit up on the Washougal River, not far from where Wes and Woody live. The big male we saw, the big gray one, had to be at least 9 feet, and it was somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 pounds. It was massive.
Good Lord.
Now, the first two that I encountered back in 1974, the male was about 8 feet, and I estimated around 800 pounds. And it had a smaller one with it that was about a head shorter and a couple hundred pounds lighter. And I looking back, I kind of had the impression it was a juvenile, wasn't fully grown yet. Yeah, that big one in 1988 was really a massive one, and hunters had seen that one around for 20 years prior to that time.
Really?
So occasionally you will get a really big one.
Yeah, like I said, I know this one that's 9-footer down here, he's been seen, I'm thinking, from what I've been told, he's been seen at least 6 times. I know you're talking about a gray one. Sam, the guy that does this with me sometimes, I didn't see the gray one, but he did, and that was back during, we saw the male back in the summertime, so I'd say probably mid-2013 is when we saw the gray one.
Wes and Woody saw a gray one in their encounter also. There was a group up there, the same group that we investigated in the Achold area back in 1989-90. Back then, there was a gray female with that group, so I'm pretty sure that was the same group. But occasionally you will get a gray one, and my thinking is that may be the dominant individual of that group.
Yeah, that's what I had thought too. That's what
kind of goes in line, with the silverback gorillas.
You're exactly right, because the one that we saw back in summertime, the big one, was almost 8 foot. He reminded me of like an old-looking gorilla. That's exactly what it looked like. It wasn't gray, but it just the way that he looked, it looked like an old gorilla. But it looked like his the right shoulder maybe had been broke, because he was hunched over a little, but the right shoulder was like cocked up in the air. Like you've seen if people like they'll break their shoulder, some of them walk over with one side's cocked up a little bit.
Right.
That's exactly what this thing looked like, except it was hunched over a little bit, but the right shoulder was, it was like way up in there, almost about middle to where the ear would be. It was weird.
Could very well be. Living out like that, I'm sure things happen occasionally.
Do you theorize that the gray hair is age, and so it's somewhat of the alpha of the group due to age? Is that what you're theorizing on the gray?
I suspect it is, yes.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too. That's what I thought.
Because in a lot of the areas, and this is around the country, where you've got a group that's been identified, oftentimes you'll hear about a gray one or even a white one or in that area,
And it's funny talking about the gray one, because down here in my area, like I said, there's 3 areas that I use, and each area that gray one has been seen in. And if you go from one area to the other, you're looking probably within a 22-mile stretch, easy. And that it's been seen in all 3 areas.
Well, that's pretty telling then, if they're making the rounds in those different places.
What information have you been able to come up with, Bobby, while you're out there researching them, kind of investigating what's going on? What have you hypothesized anything with regard to their behaviors or, the actions, different things, why they do what they do?
Well, it's like I have, but then sometimes I'll sit back and I think, well, is that right? Am I actually thinking this right? Because I've had so much activity in almost 6 years now that I've been doing this. And it's like now some things, it's like I got this thing set in my head where I've kind of figured this out. This is what they're doing. And it's just like the next time it's just totally different. It's like you got a new one that comes in a bunch, and he's just totally opposite of what the other ones have done. We had an incident a few weeks ago where I had never heard this before. I've heard them do wood knocks. I've heard them do rock claps. I've heard them whistle, yell, scream. I've had them throw stuff at me, a little bit of everything. But that one night, there was 2 of them in the area that I was in, because I was listening through the sound dish, a parabolic dish, and I could hear one moving, but you would hear one like it would walk, but then all of a sudden you'd hear like another one, and it's like it was like not really running, but kind of running at a slow jog, and it was like going from tree to tree. And this was probably 12:30 in the morning. But it was weird, because you'd hear the sound of like one walking, but you'd also hear the sound of like one shuffling feet, like it was kind of like a slow jog. Okay, well that went on for
several minutes. I think what they were doing, they were getting closer to me. But then they started doing something, like I said, that I have never heard in my life. It was, if you took a rock, a good-sized rock, and you started tapping on a tree, kind of like Morse code, it was 3 hits, then it'd be 1 hit. And then about maybe less than a minute later, you'd hear 2 knocks, and then 1 knock. And then that went on from like 3 hits to 2 hits to 1 hit to 2 hits back to 3. That went on for like 20-some minutes. It's like they were just communicating with each other, like Morse code. Like I said, I've never heard them do that before. And that was in that one area that I used. Well, after that happened, the knocking noise, it just stopped. I mean, it was dead silence. And then I heard a loud thud, like somebody had dropped a 500-pound bowling ball out of a tree. And after I heard that, you could hear something like the, I call it like the belly crawl. That's what I call it. It's like if somebody's crawling on their stomach. I could hear that like it was going off down through the valley, and the rest of the night I didn't hear nothing else.
I was going to say, what's interesting about some of those noises, and, you know, what's been put out up to this point by a lot of different groups with this knocking noises, is they seem to think they're communicating with the people out doing this stuff. And our anthropologist friend and I were chatting about this, and it's kind of similar to what chimps do when they're hunting. They will make noises like that, and it's sort of how they coordinate their attacks. You know, and if these noises are really going on, it has nothing to do with the people in the area unless they're hunting the people. But it seems to be, you know, some form of coordination, and it's not unheard of with other primates. So it sounds very similar to what things we've been talking about.
Well, something else that I've come to theorize too, and I've had this happen probably 6 or 7 times now, and this is kind of how I come out the idea that when it's raining, to me, I've had more activity when it's raining. Not like a storm or nothing like that, but when it's raining, I don't know if it's because they don't think that there's nobody around, you know, because who would be out there, you know, stooping up in rain? Me. But on several occasions now, we've been out there when it was raining, and we'd be hit. And all of a sudden, I mean, just out of the blue, they would come, like, you'd hear them come walking through, or you'd start hearing them doing knocks, and it would last half the night because they didn't think we were out there. And that's what happened tonight, that me and Sam was out there. When we actually saw this big one, we were hit out. And it had been raining probably all day long, and we set up our, it's like a camo tarp, and we had completely hit ourselves around it. We covered in the top, but we went out there and cut branches, and we had branches and leaves. I mean, it looked just like a tree sitting there, is what it looked like when we got done. And we got inside that thing, and about, let's see, I'd say probably about 9:30 that night, it done got good and dark. I'm sitting there listening with the sound dish, and he's sitting there listening with his. And he reaches over and punches me on the arm. He's like, "Do you hear that?" And I said, "What are you hearing?" He said, "I'm hearing something walking." He said, "It's coming towards us." Well, I started listening in the direction he was listening. And you could hear, I mean, it sounded just like a big man was stomping his feet coming through the trees. Well, all of a sudden, the sound stopped. Okay? Well, from about 9:45 to about almost 11 o'clock, we didn't hear nothing else. And then all of a sudden, you started hearing it again, like it started walking again. But this time, it was getting louder and louder and louder. And the only way that I can describe the way it sounded like an elephant coming through the woods, because it was breaking branches and limbs left and right when it was coming through there. And I'm not talking small twigs. I mean, it was breaking branches like it was nothing. Well, about that time, we heard something like right dead in front of us. And what we could hear was, it sounded like, you heard people when they got asthma, they can't breathe, they're like that.
Right.
That's what this thing sounded like. And I mean, we were listening through the dish, and it sounded like it was right over your head breathing on you. That's what it sounded like. We heard it walk off. It walked completely right in front of us. At this time, we couldn't see it because we were listening. It walked right in front of the area we were in. It kept walking, went across, and went down in the valley on the right-hand side of us. Well, I took my headset off, and he did too. And we sat there looking at each other, and we were kind of whispering back and forth. And I said, I can't believe that thing got that close to us, because I'm talking the sound wasn't like maybe 40 or 50 feet from us. Well, about that time, on the right-hand side of me, and like I said, we're completely hid. You cannot see us, and we got mud put on us, so to hide our smell, you didn't know we was there.
Right.
About on the right-hand side of us, within probably 20 minutes of that thing walking off, we heard these loud cracks. And, I mean, I'm talking like huge branches just snapping. Well, we didn't say nothing else. We just come to a dead stop. I reached over and picked up my night vision. He did too. And we had two little sections cut out in the tarp so we could just put the night vision right there and it would hold it. When you had to touch it, we could look right through it. Well, on the right-hand side of us, we started hearing that. It was getting closer and closer. And basically, the way we figured it was right dead beside us. I mean, I'm talking like right shoulder to shoulder almost. We heard it as it walked in front of the tarp. When it came by it, went to the front of us. It went around, and I was looking through the night vision, and at first I couldn't see it. And I was looking everywhere. We could hear it, but we couldn't see it. 30, 35 seconds later, Sam didn't say nothing. He just reached over and he punched me on the shoulder. And I could see what he was doing. He was motioning me to look through the night vision. Well, I leaned over and I looked at the night vision. And when I looked at it, right dead in front of me, about probably maybe 25 to 30 feet, straight ahead of me, was I call it like a creature between 7'5" and 8 foot tall. It had its right shoulder cocked up in the air. It was hunched over. It was bent at the knees, not like a normal man stands, but it was bent at the knees. It had long, shaggy hair like a wet, mad dog. It stood there for maybe 15, 20 seconds, and it was looking at the ground, and it was going around, and just kept going around like it was looking at something at the ground. I don't know what it was looking at, but it's like it was looking, and it would reach down, and it was just like scraping at the ground. Like, I don't know if it was trying to dig something up or what, but it just kept scraping at the ground. It done that for maybe, I don't know, it seemed like it done it for 20 or 30 minutes, but it didn't last that long. I'd say maybe 2 minutes at the most. It sat there like digging at the ground. Well, after it done that, it stood up and it just stood there looking around. And like I said, it couldn't see us and it couldn't smell us. It stood there and it was looking around, and all you could hear was that. That's all you could hear. And then all of a sudden it took off and it just went down through the valley. And that's the last I saw of it that night. But later on that night, about 3 hours after we saw that, we started hearing knocks on the trees. Not like the Morse code, but just like somebody tapping the tree with a rock, just over and over again. And that's what happened that night. You know, it's interesting about the digging at the ground. It made me think of my own first encounter when I pushed my way through the tree limbs into the clearing under this big maple tree, and the Sasquatch was standing there, less than 15 feet in front of me. It was just standing there moving the leaves around with its right foot. And I had the same kind of thing. I don't know what it was doing. When we went back at first light the next morning to track these two that I encountered, I couldn't tell. We saw the leaves move, but I couldn't tell what it was doing. So that's interesting. That's the only other time I've heard, someone watch one do something on the ground like that. But, with the rain, it made me think too, back when I was in the Army, I was a cavalry scout, and my job was reconnaissance, was to go out and find an enemy and then to gather intelligence and, move in and pull back out without ever being noticed. And the rain, things like the rain, are what they call noise camouflage. So you can be, when rain's coming out and about, number one, it kind of cleanses the air, so your scent isn't out floating around as easily as it would be, without rain. And the noise the sound of the rain can actually hide whatever minute noises you might be making.
Well, that's the truth there, because when it was raining out there, I mean, with us listening through the dish, basically all you could hear was, the sound of the rain dropping off the trees, hitting the ground. That's basically all you could hear. So when that thing started walking and stomping its feet and breaking in branches, that was clear as a bell. I mean, there was no doubt that thing was...
kind of noise, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's for darn sure. But I mean, I've had several people ask me when I talk about that, the only way I can describe, like I said, the way it sounded like an elephant coming through there. I mean, I kid you not. At first, I always used to say it sounded like King Kong coming through there, but then, I say it sounded like an elephant. But I mean, it didn't really care if anybody was out there. It was coming through there, and it had a purpose. I'll put it like that.
Yeah.
Bobby, what's probably the most aggressive encounter you've had, or have you had one yet?
Probably the most, well, I wouldn't say it's like really like aggressive, was we've had one, let's see, this was 2014. This was back in between 2012 and 2013, somewhere in that time frame. We was getting aggressive, like grunts coming towards us, like a threatening grunt coming towards us, I put it like that. We were in that one area that we use, and the guy that helps me, Ken, he does like the call blast and stuff, and he had a sound of chimps, like they let out they start screaming. And he told me, he said, let's try this night. And I said, okay. I said, we can do that. So we tried that. He was actually doing the parabolic dish, and I was actually doing the call blasting for him. Well, the area that we were aimed it at, the first time we done it, there wasn't nothing going on. But the second time we done the call blast, he looked at me and he started waving his hand around and he started pointing that way. So I reached over and grabbed my dish and I started listening. And I didn't hear anything at first. Well, he pulled his headset off and he looked at me and he said, play that thing again. He said, because I just had something just give me a really pissed off grunt. I said, okay. So he put his headset back on and I played it. And about probably between 9 to 11 seconds after I done that call blast, I mean, I don't know if I can do it, but this is kind of what it sounded like. It was like that. That's exactly what we heard. We played that call blast 4 more times. And every time we played that call blast, we would get that aggressive grunt back towards us. Well, the last time that I played it, we got that aggressive grunt, but then we had a rock about the size of a baseball come flying out of the tree at us.
I mean, what were you thinking? Was it time to leave at that point?
Oh, no. Unless it actually comes up and drags me out of the woods, I'm not leaving. No, I mean, it takes a lot to scare me, but I'll be honest with you, the night that we actually had that one like 30 feet from us, now, it wasn't like a scared rush, but it was like a drill. I mean, I thought my chest was going to beat out of my heart. I'm seriously, I mean, it was pounding. I thought my ribs were going to break. It pounded so hard. But because it was just like being that close to it and seeing how big it was just unreal. But no, I've never had that. Other than that, I've never really been scared of it. And like I said, I've had stuff thrown at me. I mean, we've had grunts. And, I mean, I've had them, the sound of them walking almost right on top of us, like right behind us or coming near us. Now, I've never felt threatened at all.
Do you mainly go out at night or do you go out during the day?
We do both. What we'll do is like if I go out with Ken and his son or I go out with Sam or whoever I go out with, we'll go out during the day. And what we'll do, we'll scout out the area that we're in. And the main thing we're doing, we're looking for tracks, because if you can find a track, he's either gone one way or he's gone the other. And you start looking for the branches that would, because they're bad about, they'll twist them and pop them down. And it's like a lead mark, if they're going that way, they're coming back. So we start looking for tracks. And once we get the area that we want to be in, we'll sit out there and we'll do hollers or calls or wood knocks, wherever, and then we'll let it die down. And then we start hiding ourselves. It's kind of like going into a kindergarten and getting a kid's attention and then wanting to play hide and seek with him. That's not what it's like. Once you get his attention, you go hide, and he's coming to look for you one way or the other.
Yeah. Are you worried at all when you're out there with,
I'm sorry, what?
Are you worried at all when you're out there doing this?
Nope, not a bit. Like I said, I've never felt threatened by them. So I'll be honest with you, I fear the rednecks in the woods more than I do Bigfoot.
Yeah, I like it there.
But no, I mean, I've never had a problem with I ever had a feeling like I had to get out of the woods. No, I've never had that problem at all. I never have. Well, not in my area anyway. So, and I have heard a report of there is an aggressive one in my area, but I've never actually come across him. And I've always been told that if you ever get in his area, that he'll damn sure make sure you leave. But like I said, I've never encountered him yet.
Doing this research, is there kind of an end game to what you would like to accomplish? Or is it more, let's just learn as much as you can?
Well, when I first started, it was to, learn as much as I could, because I've always been into this. And then when I actually found the area that I could do this, it was like a kid in a candy store. I just wanted more, and I want more. And now I really want more. Because, I mean, in this last 6 years, I've found tracks, I've found hair, I've found bone, we found a cavern, or, pretty much like a den where we think this thing may be actually staying, because we found deer bones in it. We found some tracks around it. I've gotten audio of this thing screaming. I've gotten pics, and it's just like, now that I've got my feet wet, I'm out to really prove it to the world that this thing is actually real.
And how do you think you're going to go about proving to the world that it's real? Just out of curiosity.
Well, everybody says, you got to have that. You got to have that $1 million video, or you got to have what it's going to take. And, I'm not pro TLC, don't get me wrong, I'm not. because if I was, that might be Sam's fault, and I would have his head hanging on my wall right now. That would have been it. It'd have been over with. I'm trying my best with me and Sam or whoever I can get to help me do this. I'm trying my best to get that, I guess you want to say, that DNA that people are looking for. You know, I want to get that bone. I want to get that hair that's not a bear. It's not a fox. And, you know, I'm not going to sit here and say, you know, oh, I shot one or I choked one to death or whatever, you know, like the other one do. I want that proof. I don't want nobody to be able to come back and say, oh, it was a bear, you know, or that's horse shit, or, you know, it's this, that, and the other. I want that proof. That's what I'm after. But you stop at the line of shooting one then? Yeah, like I said, I'm not pro-kill. The only way that I would actually put one down is if he charged me or threatened to hurt me. Now, if that happened, yeah, I'd put him on the ground. But other than that, no, I don't feel no threat for them. I don't feel no threat from them, and I don't think they feel any threat from me. Well, let me ask you this, and I'm sure Bear's going to tear me apart on my next comment, but and he's a big guy, so I'll try and word it a certain way. That's okay. Yeah, you know, when people talk about proving them, yeah, I just don't see how you can go and prove them without having some sort of piece of them. I don't think the DNA thing's going to work. The DNA thing, especially after this whole fiasco with Melba Ketchum, I have a hard time having anyone buy into that. I have a hard time, even you could have the best HD video and people are going to call it a hoax. You know how the Bigfoot community is. I mean... Oh, yeah, man. They'll rip you a new one in a heartbeat. You know, they'll rip you apart. So I'm wondering that, you know, and I've given it a lot of thought, too. And I was going to talk with Bear about this tonight, but, you know, honestly, I feel like if you are wanting to prove it, you're going to have to have a piece of one of these things to prove it. Well, that's something I didn't really want to, you know, I didn't really want to say too much about what we're trying to do. Like I said, I'm not pro-kill, okay? I'll put it like this. I'm not pro-kill to where I'll put his head on my wall. But right. I will say this. I will do what it takes to bring that proof back. You see what I'm saying? I'll do what it takes to get that proof. I'm not killing one, but I'll do what it takes to bring it back. I'll just leave it at that. Okay. Well, be safe doing it, man. Some of the stories we've heard, it could be just short of a battle trying to bring one back, dead or alive. So. Oh yeah. Because they go in groups. Yeah, so be safe while you're out there. You know. Yeah, absolutely. You know, and a lot of people think that, you know, once you bring one in, everyone's going to be out there blasting away at them. I don't believe that. I really don't. No, that wouldn't happen. I don't see it happening either. I see more people shooting them now based on misidentification than if they were proven real. I think most people would realize not to shoot them. Everyone here at Bigfoot Hotspot Radio would like to thank Audible.com. Audible.com is the internet leading provider of audiobooks with over 150,000 different titles to choose from. To download a free audiobook of your choice, go to audibletrial.com/Bigfoot Hotspot. Jim Grant, a.k.a. Bear, how are you this evening, sir?
Oh, mean as a rattlesnake with a toothache. What about you guys?
That's a good way to describe it.
Yeah, about the same. Thanks for coming on. We sure appreciate it, Bear.
No problem, man. I've heard a lot about you guys. Since I quit doing Bigfoot Outlaw Radio, I've kind of just stayed away from the radio shows, and I've heard a lot of good things about you guys. So I investigate the investigators before I decide whether they're worth the time to come on here and fill your head full of lies and hoaxes and all the other good things.
Yeah.
You know what? I think that's a pretty smart approach.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what you need to do. I mean, everybody out there needs to really research the researchers before they start doing anything else. I mean, look at your Rick Dyers of the world, then look at the idiots on TV and patting themselves on the back, breaking their arms, patting themselves on the back about what they've invented, what they started, blah, blah, so forth and so on. 9 times out of 10, they stole it from some good old boy that was sitting over there doing it all right, and what the old saying in the South is, even a blind hog can find an acorn every now and again.
Yeah. And that's so true. I've had so many things stolen over the years. 20 years ago, I never thought about, you talk to people and you're out and about and you don't think what you tell somebody, just some other guy you meet, whether you're investigating or just sitting around, BSing over a beer, will take your ideas and pass them off to somebody else. But I've seen so many things over the past 20 years or so that were, a buddy of mine, our ideas that we came up with. And I'll give you an example. I think it was around that time, a small booklet, and it was billed as a field guide to the Sasquatch. And it was a little pamphlet-like thing, and it had the Patterson picture on the front. That was my idea. And somebody else took it and ran with it. So that happens all the time. And, Rene DeHinden used to tell me all the time, talking with that guy, you would learn more about investigators and people who said they were involved in this because that's what he did. And he was like the CIA. You could run a name across him, and within 24 hours, you'd know his grandmother's name and everything.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. You've got to do that because everybody out there is out to stick a knife in your back. When you trust human nature, and then you see how many people out there take advantage of people for volunteering or offering things they've learned through their own hard work or by accident, which a lot of people really don't understand this. We wouldn't know what we know about this creature, human, or whatever people choose to call it, if it hadn't been for the fact that it chose to present itself in one shape, way, form, or fashion. If it was all accidental viewings all the time, we wouldn't even be talking about or knowing what we currently know up to this point in time. Most of it's just things after the fact. People don't realize that these creatures have got to trust you before you can trust them. I mean, it's a trust situation. And then watching how people do each other in regard to stealing their research or their claim or whatever, it kind of makes sense why a booger decides, well, hell, I ain't going to show myself to these idiots. Why would I? I mean, they're just going to go out there and destroy whatever they fool with.
Hey, Bear, will you go back and you had 2 encounters when you were a kid, correct?
It's hard for me to be brief, but I'll try to be as brief as I can.
Take as much time as you want.
All right, 1966. I know it was that year because my baby sister had just been brought home from the hospital. I was 6 years old. I was born in 1960. I'm an old fart, 54 years old. 1966. It was in August or September. I know that because my sister was born in July. My sister had not been home as an infant 6 weeks, and my father left my mother. Well, she left 2 little boys, an infant girl, and a mom in a house out in the middle of central Mississippi in the boonies, in the woods, whatever you want to call it. My baby sister was a newborn. She was crying at night, colicky, jaundice, the whole 9 yards. For some reason, we had went to bed. We didn't have air conditioning back in those days. What we would do was stick a window fan unit into the window on the north end of the house, facing outwards, and then we would open up all our windows inside the house to draw any prevailing air through the house. Well, when you do that, of course, you got to open up curtains and so forth and so on. But and it's hard for people to understand. I was 6 years old. I was able to determine the date because of the fact that I knew how long it had been since my father had left, how old my sister was at the given time. So I've roughly got it narrowed down to happening in probably August or September of that year due to the absence of my father. For some reason, I woke up during the middle of the night. Our bedroom faced back toward the east. When my grandfather and my father originally built the house, when my mother and father married in 1959, they had to level off the property. And when they did, they pushed the mound of dirt that was unlevel toward the back of the house. On top of this was a slope that was going up onto my grandfather's place. That's how we was able to build the house. We built it on 1 small acre off of my grandfather's property. Well, at the top of that mound of dirt. My grandfather, he raised cattle, and we had horses, and so he would always, fence in the whole property. And he just moved the fence line back behind the house on top of this slope that they created going into this hillside. And behind there was a bunch of pine trees and oak trees, hardwood. Something woke me up. I do not know what time. I can't even conjecture. I do know that me and my brother slept in the same bed at the time. I was 6. He was right at 4. I heard something outside the bedroom window. The fence line, due to the elevation created from pushing the foundation up against the hill, caused the fence line to be on a level with our back window. It was probably, I don't deal in feet, I deal in yards because I played football and I judge yardage better than I do footage. It was right at probably 15 to 20 yards from the bedroom window to where this fence was. It was what we call a 4-strand barbed wire fence. In other words, I can't remember if it was 4 or 5 because we did vary that, but as young as I was, I do know that the height of the fence was right at chest level to an average man, so I figure it was about 5 foot high. Something woke me up, and it was a noise. It was going, whoo, 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 and then you hear, then it'd go back to cooing, what I called it at the time, whoo, 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 and then it started clicking again. The noise woke me up, so I raised up out of the bed. Our bed was up against the west wall, looking directly east, straight out this bedroom window. The curtains were drawn back to take advantage of all the ambient air being pushed through the house. Evidently, it was either a full moon that night or it was a almost quarterly full moon because you could see in the backyard. Of course, being asleep, no light source around you, your eyes were adapted to looking outside. Well, when I looked outside to where this noise was coming from, I noticed, and I'm going to tell you my general impression, this giant monkey was leaning over this 5.5-foot fence with both arms draped over the top strand of the barbed wire. And the arms were, it was stooped down. It was kind of like in a crotch position. It was slowly swaying its head back and forth to the right and to its left while it was making this cooing, clicking sound at the same time. Well, it just blew this 6-year-old boy's head wide open, My first reaction was I woke my 4 or 5-year-old brother up. Look out the window. Look at that monkey out there. Look at the monkey. Of course, my brother, you'd have to know him, and when I get into the second tale, it'll become more obvious. Whenever anything excitable or something like that would come up, his first reaction is to haul ass wide open. When he saw this thing cooing and clicking at us, and he didn't understand what it was, he tore out of that bed like his butt was on fire heading for Mama's bedroom. Panic is infectious. I tore my butt smooth out of that bed, jumped straight into bed with Mama. We woke her up. When we woke her up, of course, we woke up my baby sister in the bassinet next to the bed. Mama, 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 there's this big monkey outside our bedroom window. Mama, Mama, come see, and because we done dove on top of her, the whole 9 yards. This is what I remember about it. She looked at both of us and calmly said, now, you know good and well we don't have monkeys in this part of the United States or in this country, So you guys just lay down here and go on back to sleep. I do remember that my mom did not get up out of that bed to go and see what run us out of our bedroom. I do remember that much. That was the first time that I had any inkling that there was something out there.
Didn't your grandfather kind of take you aside and say, hey, son, you know what you actually saw was...
Yeah, that's what happened after the second incident happened. We ended up losing that house, but that house is still standing to this very minute on the perimeter of my property. It actually was the only acre of land from my grandfather's place that we do not own. I still own the property to this day. It was all passed down to me. That's the only acre of my grandfather's land that we do not physically own anymore. But due to the divorce, as a single mother trying to raise us kids, she was working all the time, and we had to sell the property. We moved into my grandfather's house, which was less than a good quarter mile on down the road, a little farther from where this location is, where this first sighting occurred. Me, my brother, and sister, by this time, and I remember these, I can get close to the date. It was in 1969 or 70, and the only reason I know that, you know, when you're 8, 9, 10, well, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, who cares about a date? You know, I mean, it's just another day in your life. But I do know this was before my mother remarried and we had to relocate to a major city in Mississippi. Me and my brother and my sister were out chasing and catching what we call in the South lightning bugs. Everybody else calls them fireflies. We was out in the back pasture. So when fireflies or lightning bugs in the South start doing their thing, it's usually in the early spring. We was out there catching these fireflies, putting them into clear mason jars in the back pasture. We was having so much fun screaming and hollering and running around that pasture, you know, just having a blast as children play. Not having a care in the world, all we was doing was functioning on catching fireflies. When my grandfather come out the third time to yell for us to come on in the house, he could see a panoramic view of the whole pasture, whereas we was all centered on just catching the next lightning bug. Saw something moving next to a fence line that was straight to his left of where we were. Instead of yelling for us to come on in again, once he saw this whatever it was, it just started moving. He said it started loping towards us on all fours. It was not an average like a dog or a cat or a deer or a cow or a horse lope. It was more like a chimpanzee does in its locomotion toward us. Of course, we didn't see none of this because we was concentrating on catching lightning bugs. He did not have time to go grab a gun, shotgun, rifle, or nothing. He just bailed out the back door, running across the pasture, yelling as loudly as he could. Our grandfather, he most gentle man in the world. He raised me and my brother and my sister. He never really punished us or really yelled at us or cussed or anything around us when we was younger. He was just acting like a wild man, and my personal assessment. For him to take that kind of reaction out of just, in our opinion, going from calm to berserk, it really blew our mind. So I can envision to this day us all, me, my brother and sister, immediately turning around and looking straight at him because what was making my grandfather go nuts? All the time my grandfather was running towards us, just screaming and yelling. Anything he could do he was trying to do was to divert this thing's attention from us towards him. We still did not know this thing was coming toward us. We looked at our grandfather acting insane, our interpretation of it. And we noticed all the time he was running towards us, he was flinging his arms up in the air like he was doing jumping jacks the whole 9 yards. But he kept looking towards our right, which was his left. Well, about that time, we said, well, heck, Papa's acting this way for a reason, but the reason is he's looking back over here. So we all turn around and look back towards our right, and here this thing is coming, loping at us on all four legs. This thing, it was hairy. It looked like it had the mange, the knee area, the knee pad area, the elbows, the midriff, the whole 9 yards. It was like They were clumps of hair. And, you know, a lot of people say fur, but it's not fur. It's hair. Had just fell off. I mean, it actually looked like a dog that had laid in fiberglass, if the listeners know what I'm talking about. But I didn't realize at the time because, you know, I'm looking at something that I only seen when I was 6 years old that was leaning on the fence. But this one was a different one. This one was not as big as the one that was leaning on the fence 4 years earlier. This one seemed, in my opinion, our estimate, that he was younger. And all the time, once we visually saw what was coming towards us, here goes my brother again. He didn't waste one action of motion. He immediately dropped his mason jar full of lightning bugs and almost knocked my grandfather down, heading straight to the house. Well, when this happened, and my sister saw it, of course, she wasn't but about 5 or 6 years old at that time, her legs just melted out from underneath her. She hit the ground screaming as loud as she could. I was torn, being the oldest brother, because when I seen my brother take off running and I saw the reaction my grandfather was doing, I wanted to run so bad. I mean, it's the feeling that nobody knows until they've actually been in that position. But there was my sister, melted, laying smooth on the ground, screaming and crying her eyeballs out, and I just stood my ground. I didn't want to desert my sister. By then, my grandfather's still running across this field. I mean, I'm telling this story a hell of a lot longer than all this occurred. I can imagine it probably, all of this whole episodic deal from the moment my grandfather seen it until this point in time was probably within 1 minute's time, you know. I looked at my grandfather, and I looked back at this thing, and there was no way in hell my grandfather would have got there before this thing did. It was so intent upon me and my sister standing there in front of it that it never noticed my grandfather coming across that field raising hell. Being that young, I did not know. And here we come back to all these tales, everybody tells. Don't never look one directly into the eye. It'll, you know, they don't see that as a challenge. They see that as a challenge. Bull crap. That's all I was looking at was the damn eyes. But I got the impression way after the fact. A lot of people, you know, you're dealing with a 10-year-old kid here. I've thought about this 1,000,000 times over the years. Reflecting back on it later, the intent I got from it staring at me and my sister was it wanted to play with us. And I thought of that 1,000,000 times. And the reason I say that is because of what happened next. It come up within about 10 yards of me and my sister, and then out of the corner of its eye, my grandfather come into the picture because he was by then getting close to us, but he still would not have made it to us if this thing wanted to grab us with full intent to harm us or whatever. But it caught my grandfather coming across that yard, that pasture, and it stopped. And when it stopped, it was looking dead at my grandfather, and then it slowly rose up and stood as erect as it can. I was listening to your last guy. I called him. I don't even know who he was, but, you know, it was really interesting what I caught. He's absolutely correct. This thing cannot lock its knees. It stood as straight as it could, which left its knees in a sort of like you're bending down to jump, but you don't jump. Yeah, he saw my grandfather. That's when he stood as erect as he could. It never took its eyes off my grandfather. My grandfather made it to where me and my sister was. Of course, my sister was on the ground. My grandfather picked her up. This thing looked at us, and the expression on its face was, I messed up, I screwed up. You could see sadness in its eyes. And I'm not trying to portray emotions here because, you know, a lot of people overdo the emotion thing with animals anyway. It wasn't that playful intent look it had when it originally come loping across that field toward us. It looked at us, turned slowly to its left, never taking its eyes off of us, and walked bipedally into the woods north of where we was. It never took its eyes off us the whole time. Of course, you know, that got to be a fun moment when everybody got into the house. And we was all sitting there talking, you know, and I said, we called my grandfather Papa. And while we was talking, you know, I said, that I think I can't recall, but I may have even brought up the fact that, you know, it looked similar to the one that was leaning across the fence looking in our bedroom window when I was 6 years old, but Mama said there's no such thing. He said, son, I want to tell you something right here and right now. That's what we call a booger around here. And I said, okay. And it made sense because here we was, were kids raised in the country. We would be threatened with the booger man. A lot of people up north and everything, they call them boogie man. But, you know, we keep things simple down in the South, so we just call them booger man. And it always made sense to me when my grandmother or my granddaddy or somebody say, well, you don't need to hang out after dark because the booger man gets you. We was introduced to the booger man right then. That's when my grandfather freely admitted that he knew these things were there.
Before we get cut down on too much time, I was hoping that you could tell the time that you were bluff charged. And then I wanted to touch a little bit on habituation and your feelings on habituation. But if you don't mind telling the story about when you were bluff charged.
It was 1981 or 2. I had partied my way smooth out of college, went foolish, and went home, found a woman, thought I was in love, got married. But I went deer hunting in another location entirely different from our family property. This is the first time, you know, I knew that these things were more numerous than people acclaim to them to be in, even up until this very moment. I went hunting in another section of the country in central Mississippi, way about 60 miles or further from my home property. I knew I was hunting what we call a swamp that was bordering a soybean field. White-tailed deer love soybeans and corn and so forth, but this year they planted soybeans there. I had been watching this deer all season long. I had the rights to hunt there, and I was trying to figure out its movements, its actions, and so I can, you know, build a stand or set up a stand to probably harvest this deer. When it would come into the bean field, it always come in from right off the edge of that swamp. And then when it would go back, you know, leaving out of the bean field, that it always would head the same direction back into the swamp. I just went into that swamp one day looking for the ideal tree stand or ground blind to put up so I could have a chance at harvesting this deer. And I noticed this, I call it a cane thicket, and it was interlaced with honeysuckle vines. It was very thick, and it was right on the edge of this creek that was running right through the swamp. And when I got to looking at it from a distance, I saw a blackjack oak tree that was growing in the middle of this cane thicket. And I said, you know, I bet if I could get in that oak tree right there, I could ambush that deer. So when I walked up to the cane thicket, I got to walking around the perimeter of it. And I noticed that something was going into that cane thicket. I mean, there was a game trail going through it, and it stood about 3 foot tall. I mean, and 3 foot comes up to about my waist. I said, well, you know, maybe that deer is even bedding in this cane thicket. It's not impossible. I said, but, you know, that's neither the point. I wanted to get to that blackjack oak tree so I could build a stand up in the forks of it and have a chance at harvesting this deer. When I saw the game trail, I said, well, heck, you know, I don't have to grab a machete or thrash my way through this junk. I'll just use this game trail and go on in there. Well, I stooped over to try to get through it, and basically I was mostly on my hands and knees just about at a crawl to get through it. The first thing that struck me odd about it was when I went into this cane thicket, it was so thick that you could probably take 4 or 5 steps inside of it and then turn around and you couldn't see the opening unless you got down on your hands and knees and looked back. But the first thing that I found strange about it was when this opening into this game trail, it turned back to like a V formation to my left. And I kind of thought about it a minute or two there. I said, wait, you know, deer or game always takes a straight line into anything. And I thought it was odd, but then, you know, just go with the flow. So here I go into the inverted V. Well, I don't proceed into that probably 3-4 yards, and it makes another inverted turn back to the right. All right? Think of a backwards letter N. And that's what the trail was, into the cane pit. Now I'm sure enough scratching my head. I said, wait a minute, you know, this is really something strange. And I really didn't think of that much more, but then I looked ahead into the straight path then, and I could just vaguely see the trunk of the oak tree. Well, I said, well, I'm almost through this thing anyway. I'll just go and complete it. And so I'm still on my knees at this point in time. I had my rifle in my hand. My rifle was loaded. I was panning from the oak tree back to the left, and right over there in the southwest corner of this thrashed up opening, there was a dang booger, and it was asleep. It was laying on its stomach with its arms curled up underneath its chest cavity. Its buttocks or its butt was sticking up in the air with its knees in a curled up position underneath itself. And its head was facing back towards where I was. Man, I like to craft a grove brick because I already knew about these boogers, but I wasn't even thinking of booger that day. I was thinking and concentrating on white-tailed deer. Plus, I was not in my home territory where I knew, as far as I knew at the time, these things were. And this was an entirely different place for me, so it was a total shock to me. And I looked at this thing, and I guarantee you I wasn't 15, 20 yards from it, because it was at the very edge of this corner. Well, I said, well, shoot, I need to get the hell out of here. About that time when I start to ease out, it opened its eyes, and it looked square directly at me. When it did, it jumped straight up with its knees up under, and just like a spring does. And, I mean, it was continuously a super fast motion, and it crouched over in as erect as it could. Its knees was bent also. And this thing just started huffing at me. Caught the tail end of your last guy, and this thing was, I call it coughing. That's the term I've used. You know, being that I'm an ignorant old country boy any dang way, you know, you come up with your own phrases. This thing was coughing at me. And what it started doing, it started at a side pace to its left, my right. And it was coughing at me, but it never would take its eyes off me. And it was like it was slow at first. Then when it reached the apex of that corner, it went and started back to where it was laying down, only its motions was getting more rapid. The coughing was getting louder, it was shorter, and it was more erratic. And this thing, and it was throwing its arm, it started then thrashing the cane behind it. And my impression is it was working its courage up or getting more agitated by the second. So by this time, I said, well, I'll be damned if I'm going to be on my knees. So I stood up. I had my rifle pointed square at it. All I had to do was hit the safety on and start pulling the trigger. And I done made up my mind, if this thing come toward me, that's what I was going to do. I had no other option. I had cornered it. And actually, it had me cornered. It went back to where it was laying down. Then it went back towards this other side. When it got into half stride, it come barreling at me screaming bloody murder. I was shaking so hard. I was wearing boots. I could feel my ankles vibrating off the top of my boots. That's how scared I was. And I was shaking all over. And, I mean, this happened in a millisecond. I mean, it was so fast. It just, you don't have enough time to think. You don't whatever. But there I was again, looking at them damn eyes. And you know what? This thing was as scared of me as I was of him. I could see the fear in its eyes. I mean, I've done already told you 3 emotions that I've seen out of 2 different boogers. This thing come barreling at me. It had its arms pressed out as if it was going to grab me. And when it got within probably 4 or 5 yards of me, it veered off to my right, its left, and it tore through that darn cane thicket like it was nothing but straw. Here I was trying to get out of this stuff now because I didn't have to shoot it. I think 1,000,000 times if I would have pulled the trigger the first time, what would have happened? Would I have killed it? Hell, I don't know. This one was about 7 foot tall. This one was, the color on this one was kind of rust color, more like a maroon rust color. The thicket that I tried to back out of, holding a gun, shaking, scared to death, I walked out of it. And I still got scars on my elbows and my back of my arms where I backed through those honeysuckle vines and briars and all in that cane thicket that this thing just tore through like it was nothing. And this thing paced me all the way out of the woods, screaming and yelling at me until I got to the truck. I was parked on the shoulder of the road next to the major road out of there. I was still shaking so hard I would not take my rifle down or nothing. You know, I kept it pointed at it the whole time. And I couldn't even get my hand in my pocket. I was shaking so hard to get my keys to unlock my truck. Well, I finally got my truck unlocked. I got in the truck. I didn't think nothing about it. I didn't even unload my gun. Put it in gear, hauled ass home. I said, I'm never going back in the damn woods again. And then I got mad. I said, I'll be damned if I'm going to let something like this keep me from doing what I love to do the best, and that's hunting.
You know, I want to make one comment, actually a couple comments. You know, the way you described how it was sleeping is exactly, if you go back into John Green's books, and they have I can't remember which one it is now, but he had a drawing, and this was from Russia, you know, the Russian Almas, their version of it.
Right.
Exactly that same way. Exactly.
Well, I didn't realize at the time that, like I said, what really blew my mind about all this was I was not thinking booger, I was thinking white-tailed deer. And what makes it doubly worse is I already knew that these things were running around Mississippi, you know, especially my part where I lived and I was raised at. But that's when it, you know, that old light bulb went off in the top of my head and said, hell, these things could be anywhere and everywhere. And that's where I've taken my research ever since I've been doing this. Well, you know.
I know what you mean about, you know, seeing kind of the emotion in their face. When I encountered the 2 I did when I was 16, they were angry. And it was clear that they were angry.
Yeah.
And I pretty much got the hell out of there.
That can change at the snap of a finger, too.
Yeah, that's right.
Hey, Bear, will you tell the story about the goats, the habituation site, and the goats that you and I were talking about?
I sure will.
I think it's important. I think it's important for people to hear the story.
These people who call themselves habituators, they're not habituators, they're manipulators. And I'll tell you why. If you go and you start feeding somebody, one of these things something, you're taking away its dependence on its own abilities. After a while, this thing is smart enough to recognize the fact, hey, I ain't got to go out and forage for this anymore. I can just walk up to this house and get a handout. You know what I mean? When you get your handouts, you better be in this damn thing for the long haul. And I'm talking about the long haul. I'm not just talking about, oh, this is cute and fun right now, and then you get bored with it and forget about it. You better hope like hell that you're not renting the place where you're living, because once you leave that location, somebody else is going to rent that same damn house. You better hope like hell that you don't turn around and have a terminal illness like a heart attack, stroke, cancer, or something like that, and it does you in, and then whoever moves into that location, you left a problem for them. Now I'm going to get into the story. A good friend of mine out of Missouri, he had heard about me on the internet, and we had got together. He'd come down to Mississippi, and I showed him, taught him a few things, you know. I said, but don't never feed them. I said, because that is the biggest disrespect you can give nature in the world, is to take away their dependency on their own ability to forage. Because all you're going to do is make a beggar out of them, and it's not going to be pretty as the end result. Anyhow, I said, but you can cheat. You know, I taught him a little bit about that. You can sit there, you can cut open a watermelon, you can sit there, you can open up a can of peanut butter, you can do anything. Oh yeah, you can get next to them if you want to. It's going to take them a little while, but once they realize that you're sitting there giving out the freebies, they're going to take advantage of it. But then when the freebies stop, you talk about a pissed off animal. I told my buddy, don't never start feeding them unless if you assume this responsibility, you better stay with it. Because if you don't, when they get pissed off, you're going to pay for it. He was in the Army Reserve. He got sent to Desert Storm back in the 90s. He lived with his grandfather. His grandfather he got interested when he saw the results of what my buddy was doing when he was feeding these things. Because guess what? His grandfather didn't think these things existed either until my buddy started feeding them. And then his grandfather started seeing these things. My buddy gets sent to Kuwait. While he's in Kuwait, his grandfather assumes his responsibility and is continuously feeding these things. What people don't know is his grandfather had 80-something goats on his property with 5 dogs. His grandfather, while my friend was in Kuwait, a severe heart attack. They had to put him in the hospital. Even my friend in Kuwait could not get leave from the Army to come back to take care of his grandfather. Thank God his grandfather recovered. But while his grandfather was in the hospital, and while my friend was in Kuwait, once somebody figured out that somebody needs to go out there and feed his livestock. And this was something like a week later. So, okay, I'd rather not mention his name for, his identity purposes. But he's in Kuwait. His grandfather's in the hospital. Let's do the benevolent thing, go out there and feed the goats. They drive out there to the countryside, and when they get there, all the goats are dead. Something had ripped them to pieces. Then all the dogs, all 5 dogs, were ripped to pieces. My buddy hears about it, and he says, you told me not to feed these things. I said, I told you to leave them alone. I said, leave them alone. And what it was, this was their way of not getting their habit. It's like a crackhead or a cocaine addict. Once you get them hooked on the cocaine, it's hell to get them off. And then once they're hooked on it, they don't want to get off of it. And then when you're dealing with something like this who has, in my opinion, and I'm not being insulting here, I don't want nobody who listens to this show to think I am. I think these things are, if I had to describe their fit or throwing a fit or becoming dangerous, is like a Down syndrome type child. I think that when they pitch a fit, they do it right, and they will.
I want to thank Bear for coming on the show. I know we're out of time, but Bear, we really appreciate all of your stories, all of your encounters and sharing with us.
Something I wanted to mention, too, to the listeners, that we get a lot of emails about how people just found our show. And what we would appreciate from our listeners is, if you can, to spread the word about the show and help build a larger audience base. We'd really appreciate that.
Yeah, please do.